I used to be a police officer in a city in Virginia. There is one upscale neighborhood in our city with very nice homes. I was always told stories when I was a new officer that there was a doctor who used to live in one of those homes. The story goes that the doctor attempted to perform some type of operation on himself. He numbed his stomach area to make an incision on himself, but since he couldn't feel it, he accidentally cut too far and too deep and accidentally disemboweled himself. When officers and paramedics arrived, he was found barely alive, holding his own intestines, and ultimately died. Fast forward, I was assigned a call about a young female who was found dead by her older sister. When I arrive on scene, it is in the aforementioned nice neighborhood. When I exited my vehicle, I immediately had an uneasy feeling about the house. While nice on the outside, it just had bad energy surrounding it, I suppose. As I approached the front porch, I noticed countless empty energy drink cans and a Ouija board on the front patio table. Everything about this house just felt off and wrong, but when I was let inside, the family was obviously very distraught. I was told that the deceased sister, her name was Emily, was in the basement. At this point, another officer had arrived too, and so he stayed upstairs with the family as I entered the basement. The basement was unfinished and was fairly dark, minus 2 pull-string light bulbs, one on each side of the basement. The scene in the basement was similar to the front porch though. Energy drink cans were everywhere, and another Ouija board was on a small coffee table. Emily, who was 19 if I remember correctly, was hanging by her neck on a basement rafter. She had unfortunately ended her own life with an exercise band and was swinging back and forth slightly. It was a horrible sight, and another officer helped me lift her to bring her down. Emily's family consisted of her mother and father and her older sister. Her parents stated that they had been trying to help her because all she ever did was drink energy drinks to stay up all hours of the night, playing on the Ouija board. Her sister gave a little bit more detail about it. Being sisters, she stated that they were very close and told each other everything pretty much. Her older sister said that Emily indeed had been obsessed with the Ouija board, drinking energy drinks to stay up all night and talk to what she believed was her boyfriend, who was dead. Her sister stated that Emily had been saying that her boyfriend was begging for her to come join him in the afterlife, and so she believed that this is why she did what she did. Now, let me reiterate, this house felt wrong. Everything felt bad, and I had a very uneasy and sick feeling being in that basement. And not because of the dead body. After all, it definitely wasn't my first. This is a call that really messed me for a while, though, and we really never got much more explanation, and as cops, you kind of just have to move on to the next call. But 2 weeks later, to the day, I get a call about a car accident with ejection. I head to the call, code 1, lights and sirens, and arrive to find a convertible BMW with the top down, which had experienced an obvious horrible crash and rollover. I was sitting on its wheels, and in the driver's seat was a woman who clearly had a broken neck, as her head was almost all the way turned around. Next to the vehicle, about 25 feet away though, was a man who had been ejected. Keep in mind this was a convertible, so he was ejected from the top of the car. And let's just say that it was a horrible scene. I went to close off the scene with some yellow tape. I walked about 75 yards away from the accident where I found yet another chunk of the guy. I'm not trying to be intentionally graphic here, but I want to paint the picture of just how bad and violent this car accident was. Upon obtaining the man's ID, I read the information off to the dispatch, and then another officer and I both realized the same thing at the same time. These two people, they were Emily's parents, who 2 weeks to the day just died in a horrible way. And I tell you that breaking the news to the older sister was absolutely heartbreaking. In fact, I kept in touch with her for a little while after this. She had inherited her parents' estate and all of the life insurance money, etc. She ended up selling off everything and buying a different house to try and start over and repair her broken life. However, it doesn't end here because around a month later, another officer was called after a pedestrian was struck by a car while she was jogging in her neighborhood. And yes, you guessed it, it was the sister. She managed to survive several weeks in a coma, but ultimately, she just didn't make it. If you're wondering why this story about the doctor is relevant, it's because the house that Emily killed herself in was the same house that the doctor lived in. I don't know what you guys think, but to me it definitely seems like either that house is cursed or Emily opened up something really bad. That was all a few years ago now, and I'm no longer a police officer. I moved a couple of states away, and twice now I've found 2 different Ouija board planchettes on the sidewalk when going to check my mail. I never touch them, obviously, and usually use a stick or something to push them into the storm drain, but coincidence? I'm not so sure. I grew up in a fairly rural area of Virginia. As a kid, I had an obsession for dirt bikes, watching motocross on TV, the X Games, reading Racer X magazines. It was all I thought about. So when my mum and dad bought me my first dirt bike one Christmas, I was ecstatic. From that moment too, my days were consumed with riding that thing. As soon as I got home from school until sundown pretty much, you could bet that I was in those woods somewhere riding around. Right behind my parents' house was a huge expanse of woods. There was a trail that ran virtually the entire length of our neighborhood. It was a point-to-point trail with a few turns, hills, and jumps. It would take about 15 minutes on my dirt bike to ride the length of the trail from end to end. There were no other trails too, just this one long trail. And when I got to the end, I would just turn around and go back the other way. I would ride back and forth for hours pretty much every day. I ended up learning that trail like the back of my hand, where every tree root was, where every turn was, where every rut was. I mean, you get the picture. Now, when I was 13, I started having this reoccurring dream. I would be riding my dirt bike along that familiar trail when suddenly there would be a new intersection, a brand new trail to go down. I would ride down it and come to a large clearing in the woods. In my dream, I had this feeling that when I got to the clearing, I was supposed to be looking for something, finding something there. But every time I got to the clearing, I would always wake up. This reoccurring dream continued as well until I was about 14. I left my house one afternoon, hopped on my dirt bike like normal, and began another afternoon of riding back and forth on the trail. I rode for around an hour when it happened. I was heading up a small hill mindlessly by this point, knowing everything to expect. Coming over the hill, though, I saw it. There, all of a sudden, was the intersection. I locked my rear brakes, causing the rear end to slide sideways slightly. I couldn't believe my eyes. Was this real? I sat there for several minutes, my bike's motor idling, staring down the trail. 1,000 thoughts suddenly raced through my head. I mean, how is this possible? Was it always here? Looking down the trail, I couldn't see the end of it. It went straight for about 50 yards, but I couldn't make out what was at the end. It was as if I couldn't focus on it clear enough. It was just sort of a straight trail, though, I guess. It matched exactly what was in my dream, though. And so, in the end, I decided not to go down it, almost not believing that it was really there. I told myself that if it was there again tomorrow, then I would go down it. Anyway, the next day came and I again ventured out into the woods. I rode straight to the spot where I saw the new trail, fully expecting for it to be gone, but sure enough, there it was again. I made the turn at the intersection, and that's when I slowly began riding down the trail. I drove down the trail, staying in third gear, slow and steady. The trail was completely straight, and it only took me about a minute to reach it. The clearing, that is. The exact clearing that I always saw in my dreams. Dumbfounded, I sort of stopped, put my kickstand down, turned off the motor and got off my bike. I took off my helmet, looking around. What the heck, I whispered to myself. The clearing itself was a perfect circle, around 50 feet in diameter. It was surrounded by dense forest, minus the single trail leading to it, obviously. I couldn't make sense of this, though. I thought that I was losing my mind or something. I walked around the circle confused, contemplating what it all meant, and looking around for answers. I began to feel an eerie feeling, though, all of a sudden, as if I was being watched. A feeling of dread and danger suddenly crept up the back of my neck. I felt as if I was suddenly somewhere that I was very much not supposed to be. Man, to heck with this, I said. I threw my helmet back on, not bothering to buckle it, and I kick-started my dirt bike, bringing life back to the motor. I peeled back down the trail, shifting gears, and I hauled butt back home. I rode for a few minutes when it suddenly hit me, though. Why the heck is it taking so long to get back? I mean, it took less than a minute to reach the clearing, yet I've been riding down this trail for what felt like was several minutes, and I hadn't met back up with my familiar trail yet. At that, I started to panic, getting disoriented. I told myself, maybe I'm just going the wrong way. I knew that it didn't make sense, but I was willing to try anything to get out of there at that moment. I spun the bike back around, and within about 10 seconds, I made it back to the clearing all of a sudden. I peeled around again, back down the trail. Again I rode and rode, never making it back to the intersection though. I stopped, got off my bike, feeling defeated, confused, and a little bit scared now. I threw my helmet and collapsed next to a tree, sobbing. On my knees, I let out a frustrated and terrified scream, I guess. I sat there trying to think of what to do next. I'm not sure how long I sat there for, but it felt like hours. I could see the sun dropping in the sky, the woods getting dimmer. I started to feel like I was never going home. So I closed my eyes and somehow, probably out of mental exhaustion, I must have fallen asleep with my back against a tree. I'm really not sure how long I slept for, but I woke up, immediately jumped to my feet, wildly looking around and quickly gathering my bearings. And it was then that I realized that the sun was shining brightly and I was now back on the trail, my blessed familiar trail. The intersection and the new trail were still there, but somehow I was out. Quickly, I jumped onto my bike, riding as fast as I could to get home. I had no idea how long I was gone for and thought that my parents were probably worried sick. Exiting the woods by my house, I parked my bike and I quickly ran inside. "Hi, honey," my mum said. "I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. I just lost track of time." I managed to get out. "Well, it's only been an hour. I'm surprised you're already back inside, actually," my mum said. I stood there, mouth agape, staring at my mum. "Are you okay, sweetie?" my mother asked me, and a look of concern was suddenly growing on her face. I forced out an awkward smile. Yeah, I'm fine. I'm just not feeling well, I think." I went to my room and a million questions were running through my mind. I spent the next few days confused, replaying every moment through my head. I wanted to just make sense of, well, everything, to have some logical reason for it all, but there just wasn't any. In the end, I devised a plan, though, that, looking back, was honestly incredibly stupid, but I couldn't live with not knowing what the heck happened to me in those woods that day. Now, my dad was a bit of a tool connoisseur. Any tool, hardware, rope, bungee cords, I mean, he was your guy. And among his collection, he had a giant spool of yellow rope, around 600 feet of it. I decided that I was going to use that rope, tie it to a tree at the intersection, and then ride back down the trail to investigate. The rope, it would serve as my lifeline, helping guide me back when I was ready to leave. And that day, I went back out. Getting to the trail intersection, I tied one end of the rope around my waist and used several bungee cords to tie the spool to a tree, giving me slack but staying secured to the tree. And afterward, I headed back down the trail. Feeling a new boost of confidence and determination, I rode back down that trail and quickly arrived back to the clearing. I kept one hand on the knot on my waist, being sure that it stayed there. I got off my bike, leaving it idling, and walked into the middle of the circle. I started to get that eerie feeling again, as if I was being watched. But this time I shook it off. A new feeling of bravery had suddenly come over me. I felt determined to discover what it was that we were supposed to find here, and what the point of all this was. I forced down the feeling of dread. Scanning the clearing, I suddenly became fixated on one tree in particular. This tree was darker than the rest, almost looking burned maybe. I got closer to it. Flaky, black, scorched marks covered the tree. I was staring at the tree, almost feeling stuck in place, when suddenly something began slowly peeking its head out from behind it. The face was black, burned, decayed, and not human. Almost like a bad imitation of one. It had short, wiry black hair that looked oily and covered in soot. And as soon as its eyes met mine, my dirt bike's motor shut off all of a sudden. The silence caused me to turn around to look at my bike, then I quickly turned back. But when I did, the thing was gone. Eerily, though, the woods suddenly became very silent. For a split second, I froze too, until instinct in my body kicked in and told me to get the heck out of there quickly. I sprinted back to my bike, kick-started it harder than I ever had. I half expected it to not start, but to my relief, it had started. I left my helmet behind, riding as fast as I could. The image of the thing's eyes burned into my mind. In my haste to leave, I made a fatal mistake though. Having walked a good ways past my bike into the clearing, I had created way too much slack in the rope when heading back the opposite direction. I was shifting gears, going faster and faster, when suddenly the rope caught my chain. My rear wheel locked and I was sent straight over the handlebars. Although in pain, I got to my feet as quickly as I could, dirty, limping, a burning pain in my ribs. The rope was still tied around my waist, but it had somehow been severed in the crash. Frantically, I looked around for the rest of the rope, the end that would lead me back, but it was just gone. I ran to my bike in any case and trying desperately to get the pieces of the rope out of my chain and sprocket, when I saw it. Movement from the corner of my eye. I stopped, froze, looking in the direction of the movement. I then saw more movement again out of the corner of my eye. It was as if it was, I don't know, anticipating my moves, staying just out of eyesight, darting between the trees almost. I took off running down the trail, abandoned my bike. My adrenaline was pumping and I knew that I was running for my life. I then spotted the yellow rope, that beautiful yellow rope. I literally screamed yes, running as quickly as I could toward it, following it to salvation. But the rope, it began retracting, dragging on the ground, back up the trail. No, I screamed, running as fast as I could toward it. I ran after it as it seemed to run away from me. I was hoping to see the intersection, praying that it would be there. And then, all of a sudden, I did. I reached the intersection, crying, heaving, trying and failing to catch my breath. For a second, I felt pure relief for making it out alive, but that was when I noticed something. The yellow rope. The spool was no longer bungeed to the tree. The rope now led behind the tree. Slowly, it stepped out from behind the tree, revealing itself in its entirety. It was the thing from the clearing. The woods suddenly fell silent again. A feeling of pure dread came over me. It had a look of pure malice in its gaze, and a terrible smile as it continued to gather up the rest of the yellow rope. I was frozen in fear. I felt as if I was in ice water. I couldn't catch my breath, couldn't scream. I just stood there frozen. I can only describe what I saw as a distorted imitation of a human. Black, charred, its form twisted and contorted into a grotesque mockery of life. Its eyes were pools of endless darkness, devoid of empathy or humanity, gleaming with an ancient predatory intelligence. It then began to move toward me, slowly. Weirdly though, its steps were completely silent, and the air around me suddenly grew cold and carried a stench of like decay or something. With each movement, its body sort of shifted and rippled too, as if it was sort of struggling to contain its own shape. Its presence filled me with an overwhelming dread, a primal fear that seized my entire being. Its voice was terrible too, a twisted mixture of a whisper and a scream almost. I felt as if its gaze seeped into my mind, into my very being, turning my thoughts into twisted and nightmarish desires. And as it approached closer and stood over me, I honestly thought that I was about to die. And then suddenly, everything just went black. I woke up back on my familiar trail, the intersection now gone, the rope now gone, no trace of anything was left. I was in shock and in pain, and I walked back home. In the end, I told my parents that I had crashed my dirt bike and wasn't strong enough to push it back home. My dad went back into the woods to look for it, but he never could find it. Honestly, I didn't care. I was never going to touch another dirt bike for the rest of my life as far as I was concerned. Since then, though, everything has felt different. I feel like something is missing in me, as if that thing took something from me. I know that that's weird, but I felt unable to enjoy anything, unable to have relationships, unable to care. I struggle to sleep. I don't even really feel tired. I just couldn't really feel anything anymore. I didn't know what to do. I just felt like a shell. That Christmas, though, my family and I were getting ready to leave for a Christmas tree farm, an annual tradition that used to bring me excitement. My parents were trying their best, and they saw the change in me. Everyone did. Putting on brave faces, my parents asked me if I was excited to pick out a tree. I wasn't excited, not at all. I couldn't be excited about anything anymore. Sure, I said, trying my best to sound convincing. Before we left, though, my dad was digging in the garage looking for something. Hey, bud, have you seen my yellow rope? The question sent me into a flashback of full terror, leaving me screaming, sobbing, and begging for help, begging for it to stop. From then on, I spent years in and out of therapy and even institutions. I am an adult now, but I've just never shaken the feeling of pure emptiness. I decided that I'm going to go back to my childhood home, back to that familiar trail that I can still remember like the back of my hand. If the intersection is there, then I'm going to go back down it. In fact, I've decided that I'm going to try to kill that thing and get back the piece of myself that it clearly took. And well, if it kills me, taking the rest of me, well, so be it. Either way, I don't want to live like this anymore, and I'm going to be free of this. I grew up in a century house. I think it was 105 years old in 1985, so very, very old. It was beautiful, but I hated the vibes there. Always felt nasty and sort of unclean. Between the ages of 3 and 8, though, I would see a fuzzy, misty sort of apparition that would play peekaboo with me in the mornings as I lay in bed. At first, it would be misty and become intermittently more solid, waxing and waning in its visibility like power surges. For a long time, I would stare, especially on weekends when I slept in and had time to ponder, thinking that I was half asleep, but I would count, spell words, do my ABCs, later recite prime numbers, pinch myself, move about to make sure that I was awake, and I can assure you that I always was. I'm a pretty straightforward person, always have been, but I couldn't believe my eyes. But then I got used to it, and it would just keep playing peekaboo as I read my books and magazines, when I got some cereal, sometimes take a bath and came back and read. Later, when I got a TV, I would watch cartoons and it would be there. It sort of became my morning ghost buddy, I guess. I did my thing and it did its thing. It was a misty shape of a head and shoulder and featureless but semi-solid. I could see through it, but also it was like staticky and would sometimes be more obvious and then sort of fade back to a less solid fog. Also, it sort of looked like moving particles if you stared long enough, like static from a TV, but more white. It didn't feel scary, I guess, but just odd to me. It was almost like I was witnessing something highly unusual, and it was sort of bemusing. A phenomena of sorts, I guess. Anyway, the freakiest part is that it was doing the little peek thing at the top corner of the 10-foot door frame. Sometimes a little more than the head and shoulders would move out, and it would be an amorphous blob, but it's like there was a barrier and it couldn't move far beyond the doorframe. I don't even know if it was actually truly conscious enough to be playing with me, or it was sort of stuck there at the frame and doing its thing, but I sort of felt like it had some intention. Just a feeling I had, but that's what it was. Eventually it would stop, or the light got so bright that it would not be discernible, but I think it stopped about mid-morning. I never saw it at night or dusk or any time during the day if I took a nap. This was only in the morning hours, between dawn and say 10 or 11 a.m. Eventually I just stopped seeing it too. It could be because I started closing my bedroom door at night as I got older and wanted privacy, but I'm not so sure. Looking at the history of the house that was built by a distant relative who owned a sawmill and local hotel, he was a bad actor from what I understand. At some point there was a fire shortly after the house was first erected in the 1880s, and the stairwell and the upper floor were damaged and reconstructed. Not a devastating fire that killed anyone, but the stairwell in the foyer on the second floor by my bedroom was not the original, but 20 years or so younger. Maybe that guy, though, maybe he killed somebody there because he was a southern gangster of sorts and was involved in getting rid of some folks, or so it's said. Some people did pass away at the house of old age and natural causes. Wakes were held there, so maybe a ghost. Appalachia is old with history, predating the settlers, so who knows. To my knowledge, no dramatic deaths, and my family are all about knowing the scoop on the family drama, so we could never find anything there. Also, the house eventually burned down due to electrical issues during renovations after we sold it in the 90s. But it had a majorly creepy vibe in some of the rooms also, like a feeling of dread and sort of sadness, I think. I had a playroom in the attic, and sometimes I would be playing in there and feel like I was being watched, and the hair on my arms would actually stand up like fear or static in the air, and my ears would start to ring too. I describe it a bit like the air changed, like when you go to higher altitudes and your ears pop, or when the silence becomes audible. A shift in silence from normal silence to sort of complete and thick silence. It was a total atmospheric shift, a pressure change. I would be so afraid that I would almost get a freeze response, but I somehow knew not to react like that. Like I was scared, but to put my things away per usual and calmly leave like normal without freaking out or getting hurried. As I got older, I have heard some bad energies feed on fear, so it's interesting as a kid that I knew in my gut not to react like that. Just sort of remove myself, but don't overreact. I've always had a good poker face, and maybe that's why, I don't know, but I also don't scare easily, even in situations that would warrant panic. I'll freak out later, but in the moment I just try to stay cool, like autopilot or going numb, which is good in times when you need your wits. That's the first time that I remember engaging in that mode. about 5 or 6 years old in my attic playroom. Another story too is that we lived in a mountainous area foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. At the base of the mountain there was a huge cotton field. It was pretty beautiful actually, but I would freak out when I saw it. My mum said that it started as a toddler, but I would look at the field as we drove by and I would start hyperventilating, whimpering and get tearful. Later, when I got older, around 5, and learned what was up, I would just hide under a blanket until we passed it to manage my exposure. As I got even older, I would just look at it and try to figure out what about it vexed me. It was a stunning visage, beautiful and picturesque. Nothing that I know of happened there, like a battle or recent bad history or anything. But my mind saw something my eye could not, and it was freaky, and for whatever reason I hated it. As an adult, I no longer get that feeling at all when I see the field. Just a peaceful place, I guess. People even take pictures in the late summer and fall when the cotton blooms there. Also, there's sunflower fields adjacent to it, and that's pretty glorious. It's a sunny patch in the middle of the mountains. A valley with meadows, and coming off of the mountain you get a bird's eye view, and it's honestly like no other. But as a kid, for whatever reason, I wanted to walk a wide circle around it, and I mean a very wide circle. My grandfather's family had lived in the mountains of very rural central Pennsylvania since the 1700s. In the 1890s, my great-great-grandfather built an expansion onto a house or loft that his father, born in 1829, had built. The house still stands today, and we still go there most weekends in the summer as it's 8 miles from a very large and beautiful lake. I've been going there since I was a kid, and we call it the old house. The house is filled with very old photos. Some of the photos we know the ancestors in them, some we actually don't. Some of the photos, though, are very creepy. When I was a child, probably about, 9 or 10 years old, we went for a weekend in the summer. I had one pair of sandals that I was wearing, and I would always take them off next to the fireplace, which didn't work anymore. On the morning that we had to leave to go back home, the sandals that I was wearing were now gone. They weren't next to the fireplace anymore. Both my parents and my grandfather who was there searched the entire house high and low for my sandals, but they could never find them. Keep in mind that this house is not very large. They searched for hours too before they finally gave up, and I made the 2-hour ride back home without my shoes. My grandfather stayed at the house for another day before going back home. When my grandfather woke up the next day, the sandals, they were right there next to the fireplace where I had left them. My family still talks about this to this day. My grandfather told my mum that they must have not wanted her to leave. I've always loved this house and have felt very close to my ancestors while in it, but that was pretty creepy. Anyway, I went to the house last summer with my daughter and my friend. I set a vape pen down on the kitchen table. My daughter and friend were outside picking apples off of an apple tree behind the house. We were due to leave the house that morning. I went outside to load up my car, and when I came back in, the vape pen was not on the kitchen table. Nobody else had been in the house between the time that I had set the pen on the table and the time that I had come back in. We searched the entire house, and there was just no vape pen to be found. I and my family members have been back at that house half a dozen times since last fall when this happened, and no vape pen was ever found or recovered. My ancestors never drank or smoked from what my grandfather tells us. My mum tells me all the time that it was them telling you to stop. Not super scary or anything, but it is definitely completely unexplainable. I have always felt a crazy deep connection to that house too, and have taken it upon myself to research and gather a lot of information about my ancestors who lived on that land. I am the oldest grandchild, and one day that house will become mine, as we always pass it down to the oldest member of the family, per my great-great-grandfather's will. Weirdly enough too, I seem to be the only person whose belongings always go missing in that house. So I live in Pennsylvania, just outside of Philly, and the following happened a few years ago. It was a late November evening, and my wife and I were craving wings that day. A quick search brought up a new joint in Royersford, PA that had just opened. I put in an online order, and then I zip on by. The man behind the counter, middle-aged African-American gentleman with a jovial disposition and a hearty laugh. We talked about the Eagles while he got my food ready. Eventually I thanked him and I left. A few months later, he is in the news, apparently, for killing his business partner, apparently over a money dispute. She had funds and he wanted them for a new location, but she allegedly refused. He buried her outside of an industrial area and parked her car elsewhere. The police found evidence of him being in her car, several failed attempts to get access to her Cash App or Venmo account, evidence of a struggle in her home, and before long, Chicken Wing Guy was actually arrested, tried, and convicted of his business partner's murder. I didn't connect it immediately to until later that this was the same guy who had served me after an article named the business that he owned. It was the very restaurant that I got wings at a few months prior. The wings, they weren't good at all as I recall too, but he was a convicted murderer and I was served by him. My grandma's property is settled all the way in the back of the woods at the end of a long unpaved road. Along with being comically bumpy, it also has a history of hauntings that were passed between family members over the years. I myself was somewhat skeptical of these tales, not because I'm not a believer of the paranormal, but because my uncle and father have a habit of being very exaggerative. Until one night, about a year ago. Back then, I lived with my grandma down at the end of that road, and at the time, I also didn't own a car. As such, my boyfriend had to walk to my house from the entrance of the road, since his parents didn't want to risk damaging their vehicles on the aforementioned bumpy road. Mind you, this road is a good 20 minutes walk from the beginning to the end, completely overgrown with bushes and trees, and has a puddle every other step. So more often than not, I'd meet him about halfway, and then walk him back to the entrance once he went home. That night, when we were walking back to the entrance, I decided to tell him about the property's haunted history. From the silver buried on four corners of the property to appease a supposed deer spirit, to the knocking on the counters at night, I spilled every tale that I'd ever heard. Now, unlike me, he was genuinely afraid of such tales, as he himself had once had an experience very similar, albeit much more terrifying, to the one that I was about to have. He warned me not to do one thing: don't whistle at night. Now, a thing to know about me, I'm a habitual whistler and tend to do it without even thinking about it. So, of course, on my way back, I began to sing a tune. That particular night, it was unusually bright outside for being so late. The sky was still a dull blue and there was hardly a shadow despite being well past 8:30. I got into the quarter mark of the road, an almost gateway of bushes on a small ridge going further into the road, when I heard something. A yell that very, very distinctly sounded like an old man. Later, once I got home, I'd realized that there was a word in that yell too: help. At the time, I didn't think too much of it, which, yes, was especially dumb of me, I know. I'd love to pull out every excuse under the sun, but I was evidently feeling very stupid that night. Now that I've had time to think about it too, I've noted two things. One, there was no possible way that there could have been an elderly man on or near the road. My grandma is the only person that lives on that end of the road. Second, as I mentioned, was the word in the yell: help. My boyfriend, after hearing the story, said it was meant to be a lure, but for what? Me? Death? All that fun stuff? As I walked, I got to the halfway mark of the road. A field of dead yellow grass and a single fallen tree on the left-hand side of the road lay there. I'd seen it hundreds of times before, and every time I thought, why is that tree still there? As I took my courtesy look at the tree, that was when I noticed something, or someone, it. To this day, I don't know what I saw, to be honest. It wasn't a cryptid, not a monster nor a demon, but standing a good 30 feet away from the tree was, honest to God, and what I can only describe it as was a sheet ghost, a simple, rounded pillar of white, nearly 8 feet tall and as still as the tree before it. It stood there. And it saw me, too. I know it did. It had no eyes, no face, but I could feel its gaze upon me. I had never truly known fear before that night, but I froze in place and felt like a mouse beneath a cat's paw, caught and hopeless. Faster than I could blink, it ducked behind the tree and seemed to stay there. 30 feet traversed in under a second. Once it was behind the tree, it stayed there and I could move again. The sensible among you probably think that I ran, but I didn't. I didn't want to get its attention again. 10 minutes of absolute silence and paranoia as I walk home. I was utterly terrified. I got home and there sat my grandma on her little red couch smoking a cigarette. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she chuckled. Well, to be honest, I think I had. I have gotten all kinds of answers over the years for what I saw. Skinwalker, Wendigo, hide behind. For now, I just want to share my story and let speculation generate more ideas as to maybe what I saw. So, if you have any ideas, then please do share. I just recently remembered this story from when I was quite young, so I figured that I could share it here, as looking back, it's, well, kind of creepy. So I grew up in the Midwest, a little north of Chicago. When I was probably around 12, a friend and I saw some deer behind his house. There was a large field behind it that a forest bordered, so it wasn't uncommon for deer to be there. Being kids, we wanted to go and pet the deer, so we slowly approached them. We walked across the field to them so that we wouldn't spook them. Looking back, the deer really should have ran. Two big creatures walking towards a herd of deer really should have spooked them, but they all just kind of kept on eating the grass and standing there. I was in front of my friend, so I got a closer look at the deer than he did. I would guess that I was maybe about 6 feet away from this deer when it finally looked up at me. That was when I noticed her knees and saw that they were bloodied. I just figured that it was because she had previously laid down on them or something and got scratched up. I looked up at her face and I was filled with fear. Something that was very unlike me as a kid, and so we ran. But now remembering this later, something that I didn't think about at the time as strange was the fact that her knees were actually facing the wrong way. Not like they were broken, but like they had grown to be the wrong way. Of course, she could have had a defect or something like that, but everything combined with the feeling of dread that I felt looking into her eyes, it creeps me out all these years later. If anyone has any thoughts on this, then please do share, because, I don't know, it could be nothing, but it definitely was freaky. I'm from a small country in South America and attended a religious school. Every year you go to this sort of spiritual getaway in a camp that's situated in an open field next to a small river and this sort of forested mountain area. Said place is beautiful, but gives off an off vibe, I guess. Almost like it's lost in time due to its very old structures. And because of this, the place has been shrouded in mysteries and horror stories. It doesn't help, too, that the whole town was once burned to the ground in a very gruesome war that almost wiped out my country off the map in the 1800s. Anyway, here's what happened. So it was my last year in school, our last camp, and after a long day, all of my class was tired from hiking the forest next to the camp. After dinner and a short stay at the campfire, we were sent to bed that night. My class was made mostly of women. There were very few young men there, only about 6 including me, so we had the whole dorm hall for us, and that was pretty sweet. Now this dorm, which was housing only 6 teens, was a long hall full of bunks made for at least 40 people. Since we didn't have to share, we all chose top bunks next to each other, 3 on my side including me and 3 on the row facing me. It was about midnight, and we were just sort of lying there talking, joking and laughing in the dark since the lights were out anyway, when after a couple of minutes I must have fallen asleep. Now, I woke up at what I assume was between maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. I rose my head from the sheets to see my best friend in his bunk in front of me, also raising his head. He sort of nods jokingly to the bunk next to him where another classmate was sleeping. He sort of nods jokingly to the bunk next to him where another classmate was sleeping. When I turn, I see the silhouette of my classmate just sort of standing and staring at his bed. I laugh quietly and nod to my friend as to play a prank on him. But then, before we could act, I see the silhouette crouch and notice that my classmate was fully asleep in his bed. Almost at the same time, my friend and I react and look at each other wide-eyed. Both of us cover ourselves in our sheets, doing our best to fall asleep again. Somehow, we eventually managed to do so, but the next morning I went straight to my friend, and before I could finish asking if he saw it too, he just interrupted with a yes, and he told me exactly what he saw. It was the same thing. We approached this classmate and explained it to him. Of course, he thought that we were joking, but both me and my friend remember that event to this day, talking about it every now and then, almost 7 or 8 years after it happened. There was no way that it was one of us because we were all accounted for in our bunks. And so, we have no idea who was standing there that night. Also, it wouldn't have been such a big thing if I was the only one who saw it, but the fact that my friend saw the exact same thing that I did, well, it gave me huge chills. I hope one day that I get an explanation for what happened that night, but somehow I just don't think I will. Almost 20 years ago now, I was traveling up and down Chile for a while with my friends, backpacking, essentially. But we had some friends here and there, and one of our home bases was the parents of one in our group. His stepfather was a natural doctor. Awesome, right? Except I contracted something severe at one point in the Atacama Desert, and over the course of 3 weeks, while my friends continued on, I was slowly dying while this dude was giving me 30 drops of this and that, or 46 of this and that. And at one point, as I was convulsing in their bathtub, the mother decided enough was enough and I had to go to the hospital. After this, I just remember the feeling of the winter's grass on my heels as I ran down a giant hill to where my friends were. I remember the feeling in my chest. I wanted so bad to reach them. I arrived and no one noticed at all. I observed them for what felt like more than a minute. After running upon them and no one even flinching, it was startling, but it made me stay perfectly still and just listen. And then in the blink of an eye, a woman who I'd never met before, but looked so weirdly like me, suddenly was to my left, and she said, "Go back now." It wasn't a threat, it was like a mother tells a toddler. I don't know, but I immediately turned around and, in a weird sort of urgent but joyful sense, I ran back up this wet, thick hill without seeing or speaking to her again. And I woke up in the hospital to a man almost laughing, telling me that he'd never seen someone so dry that was still alive. But the weirdest thing is that I later confirmed the actual conversations my friends were having that I observed that day, and I have no explanation for that whatsoever. I don't remember reaching the top of the hill or anything, just my hands grabbing at ferns and that I was wet, like as if I was running up a hill in my home, which is always wet, it's rainforest, and I was totally dehydrated, completely for weeks at that point. I remember climbing in the ground and my toes in mud and my hand on ferns, and then the doctors just smiling at me with their faces. What I heard them talking about was just so mundane too. One of my friends was talking about agricultural class where you meet the cows with holes in their stomachs. She was describing how they keep everything hygienic, a random conversation to have with a history and political science major, and honestly nothing that I would have had any prior knowledge about too. But she was basically describing the hole and what goes on with it and all that. Like I said, I reiterated this to them and they confirmed that this was actually what they were talking about. And it was in the location that I saw in my, well, whatever that state was. Many things in my life have been very spooky, but a pinnacle event always stands out. I worked in a cemetery that was built on the grounds of a carriage house that burned down, taking at least one human and some horses with it. Now, there was also a pauper's grave of unknown remains transplanted from a tiny rural graveyard there too. And one Saturday, I was on duty and very, very aware of the male shadow figure who lurked around the office. You could hear him walking with a cane up and down the hall. It always put me on edge. He felt ominous and disquieting. I had a burial that day and the family no-showed. Later on, I swore that I heard someone in the lobby down the hall from my office though, but when I got there, they were gone. I assumed it was the family and rushed out to find them. We played Ring Around the Rosies with a huge funeral home between us. Finally, I realized there were no cars in the lot besides mine, and I hadn't caught a glimpse of someone just rounding a corner since a lap ago, so perhaps they left? Later on, I was in the giant vault that doubled as our records room. When my back was turned, the door slammed shut. It can only be opened with a key from the inside, and guess what wasn't on me? As well as my cell phone. Panic took a while to set in, and no matter what I did, I just could not get that door to open. I could, meanwhile, distinctly hear a man chuckling outside, though. Sitting against the door, calculating how many hours till Monday got here, and the likelihood of the grounds guys coming into the lobby and seeing the normally open vault door was closed, before I could talk myself really off of the deep end, the door suddenly bolted open, and I flopped back, knocking myself off the metal threshold. Hours later, I woke up after apparently being knocked out. The sound of a dull shuffle stepped near my ear, oddly startling me. Or maybe I got a sudden whiff of the familiar leathery cologne that lingered in the clouds around the building, inexplicably. Either way, I was awake and I wasted no time in locking up and leaving. So I live in Virginia in an old plantation, and there's a cemetery right up the road from here. My sister, she is also super spiritual and is in contact with psychics and all that live near us. I don't believe in any of that. But one time she called her and told her, "Don't go outside at night because the deers aren't actually deers." Weird, right? Anyway, we have seen some circles of bones. My sister and her friend have also been chased through the woods by something. And if you're outside at night, it kind of sounds like there's double the amount of footsteps sometimes that there's supposed to be. That could just be paranoia, I admit, but other people have recognized it too. I've also always been like I don't believe in the paranormal sort of stuff. There's always a reason for something. So it's not like I normally jump to paranormal conclusions. But I don't know, this one just seems different. So last night at like 3 a.m, I know it's kind of ironic, it's the devil hour and all that, but it really was 3. I was outside smoking at this little burnt up shed in front of my house listening to music. I turned my music off because I was about ready to go inside. I stand up to put my jacket on and stretch and all that. And then something just screams, like absolutely belts out a scream. I've listened to foxes and owls that do the same thing, but honestly, it sounded nothing like those. Whatever it was, its screams sounded like something straight out of a horror movie. I was standing there, scared obviously, and the trees were rustling, and it just kept screaming like it was being attacked or something. My first thought was that, well, that must be a bear or something, but then I realized that bears don't scream like that. So I'm standing there shaking. I can barely stand, in fact, and I decide that I needed to get a weapon quickly out of the shed before I try to go back inside. The house wasn't very close. So I wait until the noise stops, and the second, and I mean the second that I move my leg, I made no noise, mind you, something screams and runs into the woods, just screaming. I could hear it getting farther and farther away because it just kept on screaming. Then the dogs down the road started barking. So I finally got into the shed. I grab a plank of wood, it's all I had, and my phone and my jacket, and slowly start walking back to the house, watching over my shoulder. Nothing else happened that night as far as I could tell, but when my sister opened the door, I was in tears and I was shaking. That night too, I just sat there for hours, pondering what the heck I'd just heard. So, if anybody knows what I should do in order to protect myself, or what it could have been, then please do let me know. Also, if you do think it's just an animal, which it's possible I suppose, then let me know what you think it is and I'll let you know if it sounded like it. Quite honestly though, whatever it was, it sounded huge. And on top of that, I'm really not convinced that it actually was an animal. Many years ago, my nephew and I went for a camping or fishing trip out to Cumberland, Maryland. There's a state campground that is located on Potomac River. The sites are dispersed for the most part, and not many people were there camping. We drove to the end of the campground to the last campsite, far away from the other campers as we could get. We set up camp and everything was normal. It was quiet that day too, with the exception of normal sounds in the forest. Then at around 10 or maybe 11 at night, we heard the sound of a woman singing in the woods. Not a song that you could recognize. It was more of a melody without words, I guess. I heard it, my nephew heard it, and my dog heard it too. My dog was laying down by the fire and jumps up and starts staring into the woods. I look at my nephew and he looks freaked out. I asked him if he heard the woman singing and he says, "I don't hear anything and I'm going to bed," which is total BS because he's about 10 feet away from me and it was pretty loud. It sounded as if it was coming from one direction though, but no direction in particular. I've read about disembodied voices and maybe that's what we heard. It sounded like someone maybe 20 or 30 feet away though. It wasn't scary or ominous, but it was a little bit unsettling. I told my nephew that we should walk around and see what it was, but he just wasn't interested. And after a few minutes, it stopped. I can say for sure that nobody was hiding in those woods too. I've camped with my dogs for years and he was very alert to things moving around in the woods. He would have made it known to someone that they weren't welcome there, and it was strange that he didn't bark or growl. He just sort of stood up and stared into the woods just like I did. I tried to find any info online about similar experiences there, but I didn't come up with anything. It was a strange experience for sure, and it really has me scratching my head. At the time that this all happened, I must have been about 9 years old. I was in bed one night and heard the radio in the kitchen going. My mum would almost always work the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift, but on Tuesdays would take the mid-shift because we would have family night on Wednesdays. I assume it must have been a Tuesday when this happened because my mum was in fact home. My mum worked a lot, and 22 days out of the month, most months, so it was not uncommon for us to try to help when she was up late cleaning. Anyway, as I walked down the stairs, I noticed that all the lights in the house downstairs were off and just the kitchen light was on. This already had me running for the kitchen because our walls were a deep green. As I mentioned before, my mum worked a late shift, and my dad purposefully painted the living room area a dark color so that when the lights were out and the blackout curtains were closed, it would be dark enough for my mum to fall asleep after work. As I entered the kitchen, my mum was at the sink, and when I thought about it afterward, I only heard the radio going downstairs, not the sink, but she was washing dishes when I walked in. In any case, her back was turned to me, so I couldn't see her face. I asked, "Mum, do you want some help cleaning?" But she didn't answer me. I asked a second time, and this time there was a bit of a moaning as an answer. This didn't immediately alarm me because it didn't sound like a zombie or anything moaning. More like a, I don't know, kind of moan, if that makes sense. I just replied with, "Okay, well, if you want me to help, just let me know." She didn't turn around, but she kind of, stiffened a bit. So I took that as my cue to get out and just let her be. Sometimes she just wanted to clean in peace, as she worked with older people and many would die on her watch. My mum is a dedicated nurse when it comes to her patients because she worked in a rehabilitation center. Many of these patients would get dropped off by their families and literally never see them again. She would often take us to see them when she could so that they could feel like someone cared for them. So, still no alarms went off as I walked back towards the stairs, as I assumed someone may have died and she was sad and wanted to just be left alone. When I hit the corner to round and go up the stairs though, everything in the kitchen just shut off at once. The radio, the sink, the lights, all of it. Man, when I tell you that I ran up those stairs to my room, I was gone. Zoomed past my brother's and parents' room and ran into mine, slammed my door shut and jumped under the covers. I was thinking at the time that this is the end. My parents are big horror fans and they didn't believe in shielding us from stuff like that because they wanted us to understand the difference in what was real and what was not, and that no matter what, God is there and he'll protect us and all that. And I can tell you that I did not feel God that night. I suddenly hear my door burst open though, and my mum yells at me for running up the stairs, thinking that I had gone and grabbed candy or something and run up the stairs to avoid her. I said, "No, Mum, you scared me when you turned everything off." And she was like, "What are you talking about?" And I tell her what just happened. She tells me that I must have dreamt it up and quickly tucks me into bed, and she just closes my door. Now, the next day I asked her why she would do that to me when she knows that I'm scared of the dark like that. I truly thought that she just thought it wasn't as funny to me when she saw how scared I was or something and tucks me in to calm me down. She then tells me though that she was apparently in her room. She had gotten home, took off her shoes and went straight to her room that night. She never went into the kitchen, never heard me go down the stairs, but instead assumed that my brothers had left me down there because I fell asleep as they used to do it, knowing that I was scared of the dark and thought that it was funny. When I ask her about it now, she only vaguely remembers this happening. My brothers had bad experiences in this house though as well, and they actually believed me. The common factor that I find in our stories is that they all had to do with downstairs for whatever reason. None of us ever had scary stuff happen upstairs, but generally agree that something was weird about that kitchen and the fireplace too. The stories always seem to include one of both of those two things, and to this day, I still don't know who or what I spoke to that night. Now that I, a 23-year-old female, am back from Germany, I've had some time to think over the events of my trip. But it's hard to think positively, considering what happened to me the last night in Stuttgart, and I'd like a place to talk about it, so here I am. Now, I'd spent about 2 weeks travelling Germany for the Euros, and considering how many fellow Scotland fans were over for the games, I never felt completely alone, despite being a solo traveller in a foreign country. I guess I became too naive in how I trusted the older groups of Scots, who'd buy me drinks and chat with me all night about where they're from, who they knew, etc. Just typical Scottish chats, I guess, but I let my guard down. You see, that last night in Stuttgart happened like most other nights in Germany. I'd be by myself and would get noticed by a group of older men or women who'd inquire as to who I was with. When they heard I was alone, they'd remark at how brave I was as a good-looking lassie being here all by myself. I'd then be integrated into the group, drink with them, celebrate with them, and that night cry with them over Scotland's loss. Determined to enjoy my last night, though, I said goodbye to my new friends and donned on a short white dress draped in my Scotland flag and went out looking for a good place to drink and dance with strangers that I'd never meet again. I met a few people that night, but it was while I was alone that I met him. "That bag's bigger than you are," I heard as a jolly older man wandered over to me. It was true. I had my rucksack with me that night. "Where's your boyfriend to carry it for you?" "Not sure yet. Still deciding if he's going to be German or Scottish," I quipped back with a smile. Most of my interactions would start this way, with a friendly interaction resulting in an offer to come drink with their group. And after offering to take me to a nearby Irish pub to drink with him and his family, I graciously accepted and we began walking. He was overly exaggerating how incredible he thought that I was for doing this alone, bowing to me and excitedly telling passers-by how I was myself and how brave it was. I would sort of smile awkwardly and change the subject. I wish that I could say alarm bells were ringing, but honestly they weren't. After all, he was just a wee Scottish grandpa, one of many that I'd met that night. He began prodding me on if I had somewhere to sleep tonight, remarking how they had room in their hotel if need be. "I wouldn't force myself on you or anything." I froze at that. It was very unexpected. I truly looked at him for the first time since I had met him. He was a relatively short man, taller than me still, but with a larger build and wrinkles to match the white hair that was poking out from under his Scotland cap. He began quickly explaining how he knows that I'd be cautious about that sort of thing, being a smart girl, that I could trust him, but again reiterated that he wouldn't force himself on me. I sort of laughed nervously as all the beer that I drank earlier seemed to drain from my body, and I began taking in my surroundings. Where did you say your family were again?" "Just in the Irish pub up this hill." So, like I was saying, I didn't really pay attention to him. We were still on the populated main street of Stuttgart, but the numbers were dwindling the further that we went. My ears suddenly pinged an alert to my brain, signaling that I had just missed something important, or perhaps horrifying. So I mustered up a smile and politely asked, "Sorry, what did you just say?" "That I'm a vegetarian because I killed my 44th man in a vegetable field." "Oh, I've been deployed in loads of countries. The first 6 lives I took were in Ireland, in fact." My blood ran cold. I'm a descendant of Irish immigrants who fled to Scotland to escape the brutality of the Troubles in Ireland. And I mean, did this man kill my family? "Yeah, I killed 12 in Iraq." I could only listen to parts of his ramblings as I began desperately planning my escape, locking eyes with every person that walked past. There weren't many. We had almost reached the top of the main street now. "Why are you so tense all of a sudden?" The words brought me back to the conversation. "You know I can read you like a book, right? I'm doing all of this for you, you see. I want to protect you. And Molly, I can guarantee you right now, you don't realize how much danger you're in. You know," I felt a gentle tap on my shoulder, spinning around to see a young German man smiling at me. "Scotland!" He motioned to my flag. "I love Scotland." "Hey, is there anywhere to eat around here?" I blurted out, staring at him, praying that I'd turn around and the old man would be gone. Brief confusion crossed the German's face before the old man began rapidly jumbling up the sentence, "Sprechen die Deutsch," in an attempt to sound as if he was speaking German. "Essen," I whispered. The young man pointed in the direction that we just walked from. "Yeah, there's a McDonald's down there." I turned back to the old man, whose look I could only describe as emotionless now, as if he was staring right through me, like I was no longer there. I felt another cold shiver before smiling. "Hey, I'm gonna go grab something to eat, but I'll meet you in the Irish pub later, okay?" As if snapping back to his jolly self, the man quipped, "Now don't be like that. I'm off to a rave just now. I'm playing at it. You don't want to miss it." "I'll catch you later," I smiled. The man's face again dropped into a blank stare before he turned and walked off. I think the German man called after me, but I didn't hear him. I kept my head down and walked wherever my feet wanted to take me. I couldn't think, I could only walk. I really don't know how I got to the train station, nor how I got to the hostel, and weirdly there were no Irish pubs in Stuttgart, or at least not in that direction. In any case, to all solo female travelers, never say that you're traveling alone. And to the German man that I met that night, thank you for potentially saving my butt. I'm a 19-year-old female, and I was out to eat with my boyfriend, and the place that we were eating at has a live show right next door. We decided to listen outside to some of the bands playing once we were done eating. It must have been around 9 p.m. at this point. Shortly after going outside, this girl comes up to me and starts talking to me about all kinds of things. She has bright red hair, many piercings and tattoos. The first thing that she did was compliment what we were wearing. And I mean, I wasn't wearing anything special, a plain pink dress with Crocs. She seemed very friendly though and continued on a conversation with us, mainly me though. I figured it's because I have piercings and a tattoo, maybe that's why. I also kind of chalked it up to her being drunk or just being overly friendly. Eventually, she asked me a weird question that I didn't really understand and can't recall exactly, but it was something along the lines of, "What's your purpose here?" or something like that. I just remember not understanding what she was asking me and just telling her where I worked because it sounded like that's what she was asking me about. She said that she works at the strip club in the same town and came to dance. She then left abruptly afterward while texting on her phone and went over to this guy. Me and my boyfriend, we went to leave at this point. I didn't think too much of it and we passed by them. After turning the corner though, my boyfriend told me to check and see if I was being followed. I looked behind my shoulder and didn't see anybody. I walked a little further and looked back again. And then there was this guy. He was walking extremely quick and caught up to us pretty fast. He followed me all the way to my car, which was at least a mile away. Until we got in and locked the doors, he was only a couple of feet away from my car, but then he just turned around and went back the way that he went. My boyfriend told me to start the car ASAP, and once we left, he told me that when we passed by them, he heard the girl say to the guy something along the lines of, "She's a little nervous, but..." And he had a bad vibe that they were traffickers or that they were going to try and pimp me out or something. Maybe snatch me up or something. I don't know, but it wouldn't have been very hard for him to do that. He was easily at least double my weight, as I'm only 100 pounds. He was following with a lot of speed too, and I mean, really? What else could be the motive? I don't know. The whole thing creeped me out a lot, and I'm really glad that my boyfriend was there. I still feel extremely confused, honestly. It was 2017, so quite a few years ago at this point, but I still to this day cannot wrap my head around it. I was about 11, maybe 12 at the time, 19 now. It was around 7:40 in the morning and the sun was out and shining bright on a weekday. My mum and I were driving to school when just a minute passed by my house. We were coming up to the railroad tracks, which we did every day, except this morning we saw a man walking. I didn't think too much of it, except that it was odd that he was wearing all black. Black jeans, black zip-up hoodie, black shoes. He was bent over seemingly when we were just starting to see the figure, and then it stood up and I think it had hands in its pockets. He was walking on the left side of the road, off onto some grass with his hoodie up over his head. He began to walk, but as we got close, he whipped his head around and looked at us. I expected to see a guy's face, but instead, I saw nothing but pure blackness, darkness, a shadow where a face should be. I was staring in disbelief. The thing seemed to be scared oddly and began running. I have no idea why. Even then I was so confused. But it ran for a few seconds, which seemed like a while to be seeing what I was seeing. And then it just slid down onto the grass on its butt and leaned on its right side and hopped off like it would on a ledge. Mum kept driving slowly and we watched the figure disappear just into the ground. We both stared at the place where it went and it was just gone. A second later, as we finally began to go over the tracks, I uttered, "Mum?" And she looked over at me and just said, "I don't know," and asked if she saw it, and she just said, yeah, I saw it." And then we both just sat there, I guess, thinking. In this experience, I didn't feel threatened or anything. I didn't feel like it was planning to harm us, but it was so confusing. Why did it not have a face? Why did it run like that? Why did it act like we weren't supposed to be able to see it either? Why did it go into the ground like that? Why was it wearing such stereotypical stalker or robber or scary man clothes? Does it mean hell is real? Did it go there? Or was it a demon? I've never even been a believer in the paranormal. I've always rejected the idea of God or religion in general, and I still can't get into that sort of stuff. As time went on, though, I kind of ignored this memory, I guess. I ignored how it affected me. I now recently have been thinking about it again, and I just cannot wrap my head around it. I know that I'm not crazy because my mum saw it too and can describe it the same as I do. I just can't comprehend how it was real. But it was just as real as any other person walking on the street. I don't know why I'm sharing this, to be honest. I just need someone to relate to about this, I guess. I've been feeling emotional about it lately. So, is there anyone out there who can maybe help me understand this? Anyone else experience something similar? I've been to the spot multiple times since then, and I've never seen anything again. I haven't seen anything paranormal since, in fact. I don't know what to think about any of this, and it means a lot to me to not feel so alone and confused in this experience, and sometimes life in general, I guess. I guess I just don't know how to process there being other things like this. When I was 11, we first moved to California near the Yosemite area. Lots of forest and small lakes near where I lived. I moved right around when summer was ending and school was starting, so I took a bit to get settled and used to everything. Summer rolled around the next year. My family is pushing me to get out of the house and do something besides staying inside and playing games all day. There was a lake with lots of dirt paths and such that was easy to explore, so I'd go around there a bit and just walk around, especially this one spot that had a cool little waterfall into a smaller lake from the bigger lake of that area. And well, one of those days I'm walking to the lake and I spot someone by the waterfall. She's a girl around maybe my age, orange hair, freckles, and an accent that I wasn't able to understand at the time, which I think was a Tennessee accent. I've always been horrible with names, but I remember her name being a very common one, something like Alice or Cassie or something like that. As a young kid, I never really had crushes on girls. Most of the time, if I was friends with someone, them being a guy or a girl, it didn't really change much in how I interacted with them. And she was definitely the same way because we immediately got along. I remember us going to the lake and just walking around a lot. I talked a lot about living in Washington, what school was like, and video games, something that I could tell went right over her head. She said that she was visiting her grandma over the summer at a house down the road from mine. I remember I had her number saved, so I'd text her whenever I was planning to go on a walk, and she'd meet me at the end of the driveway of the house that she was at. I remember her saying her grandma didn't want her going to my place, which was understandable. I mean, I'm a stranger to this woman, and so would my family be. But Alice didn't want me to come visit the grandma either, which I remember finding a bit weird. I remember my friend Eric, who lived near the lake, would always come by, and wanted to come with me to walk around, and Alice told me that she'd rather it just be the two of us. Maybe it was because she didn't know him, but she would only come with me on those walks alone. I remember one time we walked out a bit further than usual on one of those dirt paths. This one was a bit awkward because of a hidden incline on this hill, and she'd have to pull me up for us to walk around and jump down when we walked back. Anyway, cut to near the end of summer, and she's still hanging out with me, even meeting me at the end of my driveway. I remember one time I was having trouble finding my jeans, so I didn't get cut by the bushes that we walked past all the time, and told my mum before she went to work to tell Alice that I was going to be a little bit late. I'll explain in a bit why this is important as well, but on our last day walking around, we went to the rock that kind of overlooked the lake, and we just kind of sat there. I remember she was talking about her family and how much she preferred being there in California than where she was from. Something I don't remember, though, is if she ever told me specifically or not. And well, I said bye to her and said that I'd try to meet her at her house before she took off. I never did. I think I was forced to go school shopping or something that day, so I sent her a text telling her, and she didn't seem upset or anything. I don't know if I just never checked in with her or I had forgotten her, but I never saved her contact. It was on an old flip phone that my parents had given me at the time when I was that young, and they didn't have a good texting or calling plan at the time. Anyway, cut to a good while later, 2021. A lot of drama is happening in my family, which I won't get into, but topics about my childhood and how I was treated are being brought up. I asked my mum about that year being forced to go outside more and if that was her decision or my father's. Spoilers, it was my father's. I brought up how it wasn't that bad though, and that I had Alice to hang out with. And that sparked a bit of a nostalgic happiness that I hadn't felt in a while, thanks to how bad that and the previous year was for us. Well, my mum then dropped and would tell me something that I continue to think back on over and over again. You mean that imaginary girl you walked around the lake with? I immediately thought that she was just messing with me, but she looked serious, and thought that the time that I asked her to tell Alice that I was going to take a while, that I was talking about an imaginary friend, because she claimed that she never saw anyone when she went down the driveway, apparently. But I know that I had interacted with this girl. I know that I had gone with her to this lake many times, but I never thought about how I was the only person who ever saw her. And never my friend Eric or his brother who sometimes went to the lake with me, not my family, never even met her grandmother as well. Today, I cannot even confirm if I ever had this girl's number, or if I ever even actually texted her. It threw me off a good bit, but then I remembered one thing that made me know that I was right, and that she was real. You see, one time in July when I was walking with Alice to the lake, my grandma had stopped by to give me a soda while she was heading to my house to give my dad something. Well, when I had next talked to my grandma, I brought it up, and she didn't really know what I was talking about at first, not until I brought up Alice. Oh yes, I remember your dad always brought up how you and some girl would walk around the lake, and I thought it was cute. Weird that he thought it was a real girl and not one of your imaginary friends. This absolutely rocked me to the core. I mean, there's just no way that I imagined all of this. and I still have no idea what she could mean by one of my imaginary friends. If I ever find that old phone, if I even still have it in a box somewhere, I'm getting to the bottom of this because I am certain that she was real. Otherwise, who the heck have I been imagining this whole time? Out back of my neck of the woods is an old dirt road. It's hard to access unless you know how to take a turn down another old road that runs around the back of the coal mine that I work at. If you follow that old road, you get to a T-intersection that you can either turn right, out to Hale Creek, or left, which will take you out to Mount Coulon. Now, Mount Coulon isn't much of a town anymore. It's an outback pub, and that's pretty much it. There used to once be a town there, but everyone up and left once the railway line got moved to the coast. That was the only reason the town existed for so long, in fact. Or for as long as it did anyway. It wasn't the start of the town, though, you see. Way back in the early 1900s, gold was found in them by a prospector named Thomas Coulon. He staked his claim and settled there with his family. Some local Aboriginals found him and his family living on their land and weren't too happy about it, so they attacked his home, throwing rocks through the windows and generally antagonizing him. Well, Thomas went out and shot the lot of them, all dead, then in a fit of grief over what he had done, sat down on his porch and, well, deleted himself all over the wall behind him. Fast forward to the year 2021, I was working out at Hale Creek Mine at the time on the maintenance crew. I had a big 7 nights of 12-hour shifts and had very little sleep. I had left my mining camp the following afternoon, still not feeling the best, but set out for a long drive back home to Moranbah. Dusk came along, then nightfall. I was driving for what seemed like forever, trying to make my way back home. I was constantly looking out for the turnoff on the old back road that ran up behind Gunyella mine, but it never came. I kept on driving and driving. Hours went by. I was on very unfamiliar road at this point. It started to bend and twist and turn all over, and narrow to the point that my little Kia Rio could barely get by without scratching the sides on branches of old looming trees hanging over the road. I was definitely lost. So I pulled over to check my Google Maps. No signal. Of course. I was really confused though. I mean, did I miss the turn? I thought maybe it's a little further up, so I pressed on and kept driving. Then, out of nowhere, I see an old and worn sign off to the left of me on the side of the old dirt road. Mount Coulon. 15 kilometers. I thought, okay, yep, I've gone way too far out in the sticks here. I better turn around. Before I could, though, I saw off to my right the entrance to what looked like a cemetery with an old and rusty archway, and above on the archway it was, in this rusty, rough iron lettering, Betsy's Rest. Oh, my curiosity got the better of me, so I veered in there to have myself a quick squiz. And, sure as heck, there was a road that went into a giant U-shape around an old cemetery full of tombstones. Generations of cattle farmers and jackaroos who all must have worked on the various stations in the area, and it gave me the spooks pretty bad. So I got out of there quickly and made my way back onto the old back road. I kept heading back from whence I came, hoping and praying that I'll find this T-intersection eventually. Over an hour passed, and then my worst fear happened. The fuel light flickered on my dashboard. I'm driving on this road in absolutely the middle of nowhere. It's now midnight. No one will probably find me for days if I ran out of fuel. I was absolutely beside myself. I mean, this is the outback of Australia. You run out of fuel, water, food in the outback, you may have just signed your own death certificate. Pretty much done and dusted, in fact. All I had was a couple of sandwiches that I took from the camp mess hall and a bottle of water. Better than nothing, I suppose, but not enough to last a couple of days stranded on the side of an old back road with no phone signal. So I keep cruising along, being extremely careful not to go too quickly or over-accelerate around all the twists and the turns. As I'm driving along this lonely road, I then see a shadow out of the corner of my eye. I don't think too much of it, staying focused on the road ahead, looking for this turnoff. But then, that's when I hear it. Swooping and sort of whooshing noises above my car. And I mean, what the heck, right? I then look up and see what I can only describe as a giant bat creature with red eyes flying directly above my car. It obviously startles me and makes me accelerate at a rapid rate, yet it's flying overhead, gliding effortlessly and keeping in pace with me. I'm watching my speedometer reaching neck-breaking speeds, and I'm bouncing all over the old and bumpy road while this creature glides down to my driver's side window, looks inside at me, and then just grimaces. Then, just as it does, it flies up and just disappears into the night air as quickly as it had appeared. I floored that old clunker of a car of mine until my heart leapt with joy at the sign of life in that desolate hellscape. I saw the Gunyella Mine CHPP's light cut through the vast and empty void of darkness. I knew then and there that I was within 10 to 15 kilometers of the intersection and the turnoff back home. And thankfully, I found it. I eventually managed to get all the way back home, and I was very grateful that my clunker ran on an oily rag, and the vapors in my tank pretty much kept me alive. I told my partner at the time all about the nightmare that I had been through, as she had been expecting me home the evening prior, and it was now 6 a.m. My phone was full of missed calls from her, for which I apologized profusely. I hadn't even thought to check my phone, as I had no signal for the better part of the entire journey anyway. And while this was a pretty scary experience, the experience that I had with my partner when I convinced ourselves to drive all the way out there one night was perhaps even worse. It was just to see the actual town, but months had passed and I kept having recurring nightmares about that vile winged creature. It seemed to have entered my dreams at this point. I awoke one night sweating in bed. My heart rate was racing. My partner asked, "What's wrong?" Again? I had been waking her up late at night when I would have this horrible nightmare. The whole situation had really impacted me. The desolate hellscape would re-emerge in the dark nights, plagued by the old outback road menacing my demise, with the off chance that I would make one wrong move and come undone escaping that creature. Something had to be done, and I knew what I needed to do. You see, I'm a man that will openly admit that I cannot overcome anything in life unless I face it head on. That's really the only way that I know. No use sticking your head in the sand and pretending things will just go away, so I spoke with my partner, and after much discussion, we both agreed that we would go back and investigate the back road at Mount Coulon and investigate the town itself. And to really drive the nail in, we were going to do it at night as well. I just needed answers, I guess. I needed to know what lay at the end of that old road, and whatever else I may have missed on my first misadventure. We set out at 6:30 p.m. and headed for the old back road, which now is inaccessible. You can go take a look for yourself, but the mine has shut the gate as it runs along the inside of the mine's boundary. Anyway, we were driving my partner at the time's new Mitsubishi Mirage. It was a real beast of a car, I guess you could say, but it had all the kit that we needed for the long drive, and we made sure that we left prepared. Esky full of food, water and snacks, my toolkit in case of a breakdown, torches, first aid kit, two-way radio, battery pack for phones and the two-way radio, and my trusty hunting knife, which I kept in my side door compartment. I mean, as if I was going out there again completely unarmed, with Who knows what was out there in the dark? But the first leg of our adventure was actually rather fun. I felt a bit like Colin McRae, taking the old dirt road and twisted and turned in all directions, slithering my way up to the T intersection. Once we got to the intersection, I took the left turn to head north and gradually west. The familiar road was as it was the same night that I encountered the strange flying beast. Except tonight brought a slight amount of comfort as there was a full moon in the night sky illuminating the surrounding and edges of the road. As we approached the old cemetery, I told my partner to look right. She was honestly in awe as well. I asked if she wanted to go take a look, but she was too nervous about it, so I just kept on driving along. As the night went on, we came to the point of no return. The road became nothing more than just a dirt track, interspersed with sealed sections that the local farmers had laid prior to and after crossing old relics of bridges. They were rusty and wrought iron, sturdy still, but foreboding at the same time. We crossed two of them on one stretch, one built over the coal fields railway line heading eastward to the port. Another was over a deep ravine. The bottom was clouded by dense native plants. The road got very narrow at one point, and snaked right and left and down and up. We were in unfamiliar territory now, and I was growing apprehensive about what I would see or find. At one point, though, I could have swore that there was just no road at all. We were basically driving through a wide open field, and I had to drive at 40 kilometers an hour max to avoid any ruts or depressions in the bull dust. I was starting to think this entire trip might have been a mistake when the road then came good again to a compacted dirt section. A random sign appeared off to the right of the road stating that we were now deep in Aboriginal land. The drive went on and on and on. Hours seemed to have passed. Were we any closer to our destination? For reference, I switched the car's function from Bluetooth headset to radio scan, the FM and AM for any signs of life, but there was nothing. I thought, well, I'll check again in an hour, and an hour had passed, so I checked, scanning and scanning. And then there was a muffled and distorted voice emitting through our car all of a sudden. And then the sweet sound of music. Ironically enough as well, it was actually AC/DC's Highway to Hell. How befitting, I thought to myself. I said to my partner, "Hey, check the signal on your phone now." She replied with 2 bars. She immediately checked Google Maps. I parked the car in this small spot of salvation while it loaded up. Now, according to Google Maps, we were about 30 minutes away from a fork in the road. One way heading west out into the Never Never, another heading towards Mount Coulon. A good thing we checked as well, so we headed onwards. And sure enough, there it was, the fork in the road. No signage indicating which way to go, just one road slightly more compact than the other and a bit wider as well. So we kept true to the road that we were on, and then came to a faint glimmer in the distance, a faint yellow light on the horizon. As we approached the light, it developed into a service station, off to the left of the old dirt road with a storefront that looked completely empty, save for a cash register on a countertop. We were now at the main intersection, signage indicating that to head right was to head towards Collinsville, left out west into the Never Never. I came to a stop off to the right shoulder off the road on a dirt patch made by trucks that had obviously turned here before. I checked the fuel gauge and it was half a tank. I looked into that old rundown service station, scanning the area for any other signs of life outside of the faint yellow glow of the iridescent tube lights above the old and rusted Bowsers that looked like they hadn't been used since the 1980s. Then I saw a figure emerging from a back room. It was a frail old woman, her hair tattered and sort of distressed. It honestly looked like we may have awoken her. The time was now 11:30. She came to a stop inside the abandoned storefront and just stood there, staring at our car. I thought, better come forward and ask if there's any chance of fueling up. So I pulled in and rolled down the window. She came outside into the night air and approached me with a great deal of hesitation. Excuse me. Look, I'm really sorry if I woke you up. We're just wondering if you had any fuel." She stood there, glaring and studying me, her face withered from the harsh outback climate. She then said, No fuel here. You better leave now." Something felt off about that, the way she spoke. There was a tension between us, I guess. And so I just said, "Okay, thanks. So sorry again. We'll leave now. Thanks again, and sorry again." So I wound the window up and I just got out of there. We drove around the old pub in the center of what was once the town. It had multiple V double-road train trucks parked all around it, almost like they were protecting the pub itself with a wall of steel and rubber in the desolate darkness. A picnic table with a tin roof cover appeared on the right side of this massive loop road. The only road in the entire area was sealed, even if it was rather narrow. As for lighting, well, what lighting? This place clearly was not welcoming after dark. Albeit for 2 streetlights in the entire area that glowed faintly, only illuminating small patches of the loop road, you definitely wouldn't want to be out here with no headlights. We did the brief tour of all that was out there though, then made our way back towards the road back home. Then eventually made our way back towards the road back home. My partner then said, "Hold up," so I came to a stop again, off to the side of the road, back out to Moranbah. She had just discovered on Google Maps a quicker way back home apparently. This way would take us out on that old dirt road, out west into the fork in the road. However, as you continue down that road for 50 kilometers, you'll come to another fork in the road, and taking the leftward track will take us to the Gunyella Road, which then headed back home. "Good eye," I said to her. So, on we went. Thankfully, the Mitsubishi ran on an oily rag as well. It was only a little 4-cylinder powerhouse like my Kia Rio, so I felt confident that we'd make it back. On the drive back, it was another long and slow slog. At some points, I'd have to slow to like 20 kilometers per hour, just to make it around some tight bends and twistings, and turning through the roughened thoroughfare which went between wide-open cattle farming properties. Then at points, the bushland would thicken around creeks and runoff areas, and you could see a meter off the sides of the road. After taking the leftward turn in what was a slight fork in the road, we made our way homebound, and that was when it happened. Some sort of a large creature came bounding out from the dense bushland and right in front of our car. I came to an abrupt stop immediately, and there in our headlights was a massive cow. It looked at us, then took off back into the bushland. I was a little bit stunned, because that was close, too close. After gathering myself, we went back home, and the rest of the journey was, well, rather mundane to say the least. I guess the only exception was an interesting stretch of road that had been well sealed and snaked through dense bushland. I was impressed by the craftsmanship of how well compacted it was. Then suddenly we were back on dirt road again. Hours on and we made it to the Gunyella Road, intersections with lighting signaling the turn-offs to local mines and explosive factories that make the bomb products for them, and so on and so forth. The usual kin of the coalfields. Then we made it home as the first light of morning emitted from the horizon. Pulling into our driveway, we both looked at each other, shrugged as if to signal, what the heck was all that about? Then got out of the car and we headed inside. It's a strange feeling out there. It's the desolation, I think. The lack of, I guess. It's what really drives the tension, I suppose. I mean, any moment can be fraught with demise, but it gave me the closure that I needed to put to rest the monsters in my head, because whatever I saw that night when I made that near-fatal misadventure, I guess it's going to remain a mystery for me. Who knows? Maybe that might actually be for the best. We rent a home that, for reasons that no one will explain, is about half of the rental rate in our area. We've been here for about 5 years, and the owner has not raised the rent a dime at all. But strange things consistently happen in the house. Most of them are pretty benign and, I guess, easily dismissed. Things being moved around without explanation, odd noises, feeling like someone is moving around when rooms are empty. But our dog will suddenly start barking at something that he seems to see. Lately, though, things have become more, I guess the word is aggressive. Several times my wife and I have physically felt something touch us, only to turn and find the room empty. I felt a strong tap on my sternum. My wife had something blow in her ear so deliberate that she actually started crying out of fear. But today was the strangest. So I went to open a door to a stairway down into the basement this morning, and the whole door literally fell onto me. Aside from me, no one in our home is really capable of doing this too. Our kids are way too young. The door was fine last night. I heard nothing during the night. Our dog sleeps next to that door as well, so it's weird that they didn't bark or anything. Really, I just have no explanation, and that's why I'm here. I don't know what to do about any of this. So my question for all of you is, what should we do? So, me, a 32-year-old male, and my brother, 28 and male, and our disabled mother all live together in a trailer about 30 minutes from Nashville, Tennessee. I was wary of moving there at first for the stereotypes you may hear about trailer parks, but luckily we've had zero issues in the 10 years that we've been here. We have very nice neighbors, well-kept yards, etc., etc. About a week ago, we were finally putting up our Christmas tree, drinking probably too much beer, listening to Christmas music, Christmas spirit in full swing. During our random banter, my brother says, "Oh yeah, I can't believe I forgot to tell you earlier today. At work, the owner had to kick out some guy who was acting super creepy." My brother works at the Stocker, at a family-owned little market about a mile from our home. He went on to tell me that this younger-looking guy was pacing the aisles, sometimes standing still for minutes at a time and not responding when the owner would ask if he needed help finding something. After about 20 minutes of this, the owner asked him to please leave because he was apparently scaring the customers, and without a word, he left. Anyway, we continue with our good time, hanging ornaments, drinking, getting our mum involved as well, with ornaments, not the drinking of course, and all is good. We wrap up at around 10:30 p.m, help our mum to bed, she's in a wheelchair, and decide that we might as well finish off the ton of beer that we have left and just admire our decked out tree. Around 11:30, we decided to go on the front porch to share a cigarette as we usually do when we've tied on a good buzz. My brother opens the door and almost immediately closes it. I ask what's up and he says, "No way. The guy I was telling you about, just like Michael Myers, walked down the street past our house, dude." I thought that was pretty strange, but I wasn't super concerned. We waited a few minutes, then went and smoked as we did usually, and went back inside. Now, my brother and I aren't troublemakers at all, but I'm pretty confident in our ability to defend ourselves if we had to. At this point, these are just thoughts in the back of my mind, though. After all, I haven't even seen this guy. Yet, anyway. Fast forward to about 2 a.m. We're more than drunk enough to go ahead and call it a night, after one more ciggy. My brother opens the door, and within seconds I hear him say, Whoa, hey man, you good? Hey, buddy, what's up? You good?" I'm in the kitchen at that time, but quickly decided that this doesn't sound right and rush over to the door. What I see when I get to the open door is a younger man standing on our deck about 3 feet from our front door. He's pretty tall, about 6'4", and another thing that I noticed is that he looks a lot like Adam Driver, which was a detail my brother jokingly mentioned earlier during tree time, so I'm realizing for the first time that this must be the guy that he's been talking about. One thing my brother must not have got close enough to notice at work, though, was this guy's eyes. I am not exaggerating when I say that I've never seen anything like it. His body language was super menacing, but his eyes were the strangest combination of wide-eyed bewilderment and fury. Like us opening our front door confused him and also made him very angry. I joined my brother in explaining to him that it's late and that he should head home. After what I'd say was about 30 seconds of staring, he just walked off without a word. I peeked out of our blinds to make sure that he really left and saw nothing. We both tried to laugh it off and were saying things like, "Well, that was pretty weird, huh?" But it took a while for my adrenaline to sort of taper down. But the thing that I kept thinking to myself that bothered me was those 30 seconds to me felt like he was the one deciding what the next move would be. But what that could have been, I have no idea. I also didn't love that my brother said when he opened the door he was already standing there, so for how long was he actually there for? We calmed down watching some YouTube videos in the end. And after about 30 minutes or so, I say to my brother, "Okay man, let's just go to bed. I'll take one more look outside to be safe, but I feel like it wasn't really necessary." I open the door and he's back again. The streetlights are paced very far apart in our trailer park, but at the edge of our driveway, there, I see his silhouette probably 50 feet away again, just staring at our front door. I feel I should mention here that he's not there texting or on the phone with someone or anything. He's just standing there. I feel bad in hindsight because I'm sure this poor guy definitely has mental health issues, but between being drunk and exhausted and the look he gave us earlier, I was just over it. I finally put some bass into my voice and said, "Hey man, you can't just stand in our driveway. You're being creepy, dude. Just please leave. I really don't want to call the cops on you, so just don't make me do it." This seemed to work. His demeanor didn't change at all, but the word cops seemed to do the trick. He turned around and he walked away. In the end, I really hope that we handled that well. I understand and empathize with people with mental health problems and have friends and family who unfortunately suffer from those things too. However, I still cannot shake the feeling that something bad could have happened that night. He didn't finally leave our porch earlier that night until I showed up to the door, essentially making him outnumbered, and even then he still came back afterward. Look, I hope he's okay out there. We haven't seen him since. I also hope not calling the police wasn't a bad choice and that he isn't out there with bad intentions on somebody else's front deck at like 2 a.m, who lives alone or is elderly, etc. I wish I could have figured out what that was all about, but during every interaction me or my brother had with him that day and night, he just never spoke a word, which in the end is perhaps the creepiest part of this whole event. I don't know what it is. I've lived in the same house for the last 18 years and it's only gotten worse too. I live in an old coal mining town in Pennsylvania. I know that my house is haunted, but I believe that to be beside the point. Something is stalking my family. The first encounter I had was in the early 2010s. I heard my name being called repeatedly from far away, and it sounded like my friend. Started walking towards home and turned because I felt like I was being watched. I saw a dark humanoid figure that was at least 7 or 8 feet tall, and upon seeing it, I ran home. Things were fairly quiet as far as I can remember up until the last few years, but recently things have been amping up a lot. It started as rustling in the woods and the feeling of being watched. Next came the deer. So many deer. There was one too that I recall seeing multiple times in the same spot for a few days on my way home that just didn't look right. The most recent encounters has left me researching what to do. You see, 2 nights ago, my mum saw a pale white face with glowing eyes pressed up against the front door. She said that she froze in fear and didn't know what to do. Tonight, I got home after dark and walked toward my house. Seconds after I locked my car, I heard a blood-curdling scream come from the train tracks, followed by a very calm voice yelling "help me" very loudly. I froze in fear for a solid 15 seconds just listening. I slowly walked up my porch steps, just listening to 2 different voices screaming at once, one frantic and screeching, while the other was calm and just called out for help. I yelled in the front door for my mum because the frantic voice sounded vaguely like my younger sister, but I thought maybe she was messing around. When she came outside, it grew quiet and the frantic voice had stopped. We then heard "help me" 1 or 2 more times, faintly, but then nothing. My sister, she was at a friend's house, and so it was definitely not her. We went to pick up dinner, and there were deer everywhere again. Now, this isn't completely uncommon for PA to see a ton of deer, but like I said before, these ones were weird. They stared right at you and they never ran from the car at all, even if they were in the middle of the road too. So, someone, please help me and tell me what the heck is going on. What are these things? So every summer in my city, me and my friends like to make small campfires in chill, secluded areas because we don't want to drive an hour to an actual campsite and pay any campsite fee to do so. These also happen pretty spontaneously, so it's a nice last-minute hang just to do for us. There's this one spot near my house that's located by a river that's really nice because no one usually goes there. The only thing to be worried about are bears though, because living in the Pacific Northwest is challenging like that, and my house specifically is located right next to the mountains and the forest. Now, one particular night at 11 p.m, I decided to go ahead of my friends and meet them at the spot and set things up early because I want us to be chilling once they all get here. The spot that I get to has a 2-minute paved walkway I have to go through, and then I have to take a small trail ramping down the right side of the bridge that crosses over the river. Along this paved walkway are 2 lamps located at halfway and another at the start of the bridge or the ramp down to the campfire spot. So, I park my car at the beginning of the trail on the street and bring my campfire stuff, like flashlight, lighter, small firewood, small shovel to dig out the pit, etc. I get to the spot, and it's a small sandy beach kind of embankment on the side of the river, with a small wading area for toddlers with their families during the hot summers. I set up the chair, and I get to dig in the pit with only my flashlight illuminating where I'm digging. I'm also shoveling the sand right next to me, nowhere near the water. But all of a sudden I hear a loud splash. A splash so loud that it can only come from something equally large, like a 2-hand-sized rock or something. I'm confused because I swear that I'm not throwing my sand into the water, even though I'm only a few feet away, I guess. I shine my flashlight at the water, and I don't see anything. So I kind of just brush it off, thinking I'm just hearing things. But as I keep shoveling a bit more, I hear another loud splash. At this point, I think something is falling from above because, logically, something must be falling into the water. I point the flashlight above where some trees are above the river, and I don't see anything big enough to make that sort of splash. So as I keep digging, with my heart rate kind of going at this point, I hear a rustling past the arch where the bridge goes over the river. I quickly grab my light and shine it towards where I heard the rustling. I call out, "Hello?" There's no response. In my own head, it was a bear. I should be getting out of there immediately, but there was no bear or signs of anything for that matter. So I tell myself I must just be hearing things now because, I've seen horror movies before and my mind is playing tricks on me, right? But then I hear the noise again and it clearly sounds like leaves being rustled, so I shine my flashlight over to the area again, and as I focus my eyes towards the illuminated area, I then see the naked back of a man hunched over. I was kind of frozen in anxiety and stress because, honestly, of all the things I was to see, I didn't think that I'd see the naked back of some dude. From the quick analysis my brain could muster up, he looked to be in mid-40s, shaved, not bald, and medium-ish build, like a mix between chubby and built, I guess. But as I had my flashlight staying on his back, he started to stand up, and the first thing that I noticed was that he was not wearing any pants either. My next reflex was to start packing up all my stuff and getting the heck out of there because now I'm piecing in my head that he must have been throwing things into the water to scare or shoo me away. So after using my reflexive deductive skills, I proceeded to speed walk out of there with all of my stuff. I'm carrying all of my things with me and briskly walking up the ramp, and I'm now on the paved path out of the forest. I can feel my heart beating in my chest, and I'm frequently looking back to make sure that I'm not being followed. I am in Crocs, mind you, so I'm hoping that if I have to book it out of here, I'd regret not being in sport mode from the get-go. I make it to the halfway point though, and a sense of relief starts setting in knowing that I made it safely out of this very scary situation. But as I check behind me for the final time, I see something. Slowly creeping over the ramp is the naked man crawling on all fours as if he was a primate walking. His head was positioned towards me, looking at me as he made his way to the middle of the paved walkway. He slowly then gets up from his stance and starts standing on his feet and positions his body to face me. After setting himself into this new position, the man then starts running towards me. Well, at that, I absolutely booked it. I ran as hard and as fast as I could down that path. My flashlight jumped out of my pocket at one point and I lost it, but I didn't care because, a whole naked man was chasing me at 11 p.m. at night in a secluded forest. I looked back for a split second, and the man was still running towards me, still completely naked. He could have my flashlight for all I cared at that moment. I wanted to make it out of this situation alive. I finally made it out of the forest, and I run to my car, which is only 30 feet away from the end of the forest. I desperately get to my car, and like a classic horror movie, I fumble with trying to get my key fob to unlock my car. And yes, I actually dropped my keys and quickly think to myself, I'm actually going to die. But I brush the thought off and pick them up. I finally get a hold of my fob properly, unlock my doors, and throw my things into the back seat, before quickly getting into the driver's seat. This felt like an eternity, but in hindsight was most likely about 6 seconds altogether. As I try to guide my key into the ignition, I am fixated on the end of the paved path that I was just at a few seconds ago, waiting to see if the naked man was still coming. I feel my key to go into the ignition, and I switch my sights onto the road in front of me, and then I zoom out of the area as fast as I could. As I drive away, and I'm a good 30 seconds from the location of the horror that just took place, I get a call on my phone. It was my friends calling me asking if I'd made it to the spot yet, and all I say to them is, "Guys, do I have a crazy story to tell you?" They pull up to my house because, again, it was actually decently close to the campfire area, and I told them the whole story the way that I told it just now. They swear that it was none of them trying to prank me or anything like that too, and I also knew none of them would try to full sprint at me with their dong out like that. But as we're just talking out in front of my house, there's a college student who looks like he was walking home that's going towards the direction of where I encountered the naked man. I just yelled out to him, "Hey, man, be careful, there's a naked guy that was chasing me by the bridge that crosses over the river there." He responds saying, "Oh really? I gotta go over the bridge to go home." All I tell him is, "Good luck, man." The next day I reported it to the police by phone, but they sent over an officer so I could tell them in person and show them where the area that I saw these things was at. When we went to see where I initially saw the man's back hunched over, they said that they didn't see any trace of anyone being there previously, but the officer did say that they would make a note of it anyways, in case it ever happens again. Some friends say that it was a skinwalker. Others say, more realistically, that it's either a homeless, mentally ill, or drunk or high person. One theory I've heard my friends say is that it's a future version of me pulling a prank on past version of me because, honestly, if or when time travel is real, I would totally screw with my younger self like that. Anyway, that's my story, and it's something that will always stick with me. That feeling of running away like that in the dark is something that will never leave me. It is something that I often still talk about with all of my friends. So, I was on an ocean crossing from San Pedro, California, to Papeete, Tahiti, on a 60-foot sloop. We left in early July. It was 5,500 miles, and it was me, first mate, another crew, and a first-time captain. I was the head of night watchman along with the other crewmen. It was the night of day 12 as well, and we were like 1,000+ nautical miles from any land, and there were no ships on the AIS for hundreds of miles. It was around 3 in the morning, 2 hours before my shift was done, and we had a policy of only using red light in the cockpit at night to save our night vision in case we need to go forward and fix something. I was looking at the nav when I felt something watching me from the aft of the ship. There's not a lot of interaction with anything other than the crew out there, so you know when there's another presence almost. Happens a lot when there's whales or dolphins too. Hard to explain, but if you know, you know. Anyway, the ship had a swim step on the stern and a 2-ish-foot tall transom until you got into the actual cockpit. I looked back at the stern, and crouching on the swim step, so only its forehead, eyes, and hands were visible, was a blackish-grey thing. Whatever it was bald and looked shiny, and it was staring intently directly at me with beady eyes reflecting the red light due to the cockpit. I completely froze and, after meeting its gaze for a few moments, stared directly ahead at the nav. A moment later, I heard a splash which made me look back, and when I did, it was gone. The crewman with me didn't see it, and I didn't say anything about it for a couple of days. Then at dinner one evening, the captain told us of something that he had seen in the early hours of the morning ring that day. Then at dinner one evening, the captain told us of something that he had seen in the early hours of the morning ring that day. A dark, slender thing, treading water next to the ship, lazily bobbing there but never taking its eyes off of the captain. I then relayed my story to him and the crewmen, and we just couldn't come up with an explanation. We didn't see anything else for the rest of the trip, but we all did get that sense that we were being watched when we were alone on the deck. So, Soren, mermaid, sea demon, I have no idea. I live in the Klamath Mountains in eastern Oregon, about 20 miles from the Californian border. Growing up, I spent a lot of time outside camping, hunting, fishing, etc. Well, a few months ago, I had a strange experience on a family trip to our cabin near Crater Lake, and I wanted to see if anybody else could help me maybe find more info on what I saw. So, I was by myself birdwatching in a small pond in the woods, maybe half a mile from the cabin in the late afternoon. I was sitting on a big log with binoculars. I wasn't in a blind or anything, but I picked a spot where I thought I'd be less visible to any animals. After about an hour, I hadn't seen much, except a few common ducks, and it didn't seem like many animals were very active, so I was thinking about leaving. This was maybe about an hour before sunset, I think. But then I saw something move in the trees across the pond, probably 100 feet away. It was just a flash between trees, and I didn't really get any kind of good look at it. But I kept watching the spot, and after maybe 5 minutes, I saw something dart from one tree to another. It was bigger than most any local bird, except maybe a heron, and moved very fast without making any noise. But I still didn't really know what I was looking at. This happened again a few minutes later, and then again a few minutes after that. Each time it seemed to be moving closer as well, to the pond that is. I don't think it knew that I was there, but it was staying incredibly well hidden, and only revealed itself for a split second at a time. At this point, I'm thinking maybe it's a kit fox or a pine marten because of how fast and silently it moved. But I still hadn't got a good look at it, any part of it, in any detail yet. It moved between trees a few more times, until it was behind a big dead tree right on the shore. I was staying as still and silent as possible, but still worried that it would see or more likely smell me and I would spook it. But after a few more minutes, I saw something move at the edge of the water, a little arm and hand that looked just like a human's, reached out and touched the mud, and then the head and the other arm came into view as it leaned out to drink from the water. I could only see the head and the shoulders and arms from where I was, but they looked so much like a person's, except it was way too small and covered in what looked like, I don't know, like grayish-brown fur. The face wasn't exactly human either, more monkey-like, but it was too far away to see much detail. I decided to lift my binoculars to get a closer look, but as soon as I moved, it looked up and then disappeared back behind the tree again. I watched until it started to get dark, but I didn't see it again, not even darting behind the trees. I went back to the cabin and I told my grandpa what I saw. He's been a rancher in this area his whole life, and he said, "Sounds like you ran into a hide-behind," and just laughed. I said, "No, Grandpa, seriously, this isn't a joke." He said that he'd heard stories about Bigfoot and hide-behinds and several times saw little human footprints on hunting trips deep in the mountains where, really, no children would be. What I mean is that I think he believed me, but he really didn't know much. I asked my dad and brothers, but they just started giving me a hard time about squatching. I went back to the pond the next day and walked around to where the creature had been, but I didn't find any tracks or scat or fur or anything. I did figure that it had to be probably about 3.5 or 4 feet tall based on the trees that I'd seen it near, but narrow enough to hide completely behind a pine, which makes me think that it must have been standing and moving upright. And really, that's it. I wish I'd seen more of it, but that face and hands were absolutely not like any local animal. It looked very much like a monkey or a furry little human. I've tried to find more info, but the only cryptid people seriously talk about in this area is Bigfoot. The hide-behind seems to be like a joke around here. There may be little people or humanoids in some of the local Native American folklore, but not a lot of detail that I could find. Anyway, I really do hope someone here has some idea as to what I might have seen. It was a very unique and memorable experience, and any further information would be appreciated very much. My name is Anastasia, and a few days ago, something happened that, whenever I think about it, makes me feel sick. You see, we moved to an East Coast town about maybe a year ago to be closer to family. So close, in fact, that my aunt, her wife, and my cousins are only 10 minutes walk from my house. Granted, we are very spaced out and borderline rural despite living about 15 minutes from the outskirts of a big city. But in any case, I was walking my two little dachshunds back home from my aunt's house. My mum hates it when I'm alone the majority of the day, so I spend time at their house, and I was genuinely enjoying my time. It was cold and quiet, but oddly beautiful that day. I got home, fed my pups and two birds, and FaceTimed a friend. I was talking with them and doing chores, and was admittedly being loud and giggly when taking out the trash to the cans on the side of my house. I get back inside and lay down in bed still chatting, when my bird starts calling out at something. Now, anyone who has owned a parrot knows that they have a distinct noise for certain moments. She's been in my family for like 76 years and with me my whole life, so I knew the sound was alarm or intrigue. I brush it off as her seeing herself in the window reflection and go back to talking to my friend. I get up to get some water and my back is to the sliding glass door, thankfully locked, when my friend has the wind knocked out of him. I'm confused and think that he's hurt, and he tells me, "Go back to your room now." I initially scoff, but then I see it in my camera view. There is a man with his face and hands pressed up against the glass door. He's a middle-aged white guy in a grey pullover and dark pants, and with a grin on his face. My friend, ever the best in panic situation, tells me, "Don't look at him, just go to your room." I was shaking so hard. I'm blubbering and decide to lock me and my dogs in my closet. My parrot is still going crazy, mind you. English isn't my first language, and it's bad when I'm shocked, so I revert back to my native language, which he doesn't know. Luckily, my friend knows to take charge, and he tells me that he'll be over in 10 and he calls the police. I'm thinking that I can run to my mum's room and find the gun, so if the guy comes into the house, I can blow a quarter-sized hole in his chest if I need to. I'm debating getting up when I hear tapping on my window. It's slow and intentionally creepy, and my stupid dog starts barking. I'm ready to accept my death at this point. I'm a teenage girl, home alone, and I am about to die, it seems. But wait, my aunt should about to be leaving for work at this point. I shoot her a quick text telling her that there's a man at our place. The tapping has stopped, and I then think it's over when I realize something that makes my heart fall into my stomach. I left the front door unlocked when I took out the trash. This keeps getting worse, and I beg my friend to hurry. The tapping thankfully returns to my window, and I can only close my eyes and hope that someone gets here quickly. It felt like such a long time crying to another teen who's breaking multiple traffic laws. Never before have I been so grateful to hear another man's voice yelling outside of my house at 1 a.m. It was my God-sent neighbor. Apparently his pregnant wife was having bad nausea and went out on the deck, and where it's situated you can see my whole backyard. She got a bad feeling after seeing the unfamiliar man approach my door and woke her husband up to check it out. And honestly, I thank God every day for that woman, because I think she may have actually saved me. I let my neighbors into my house, and my aunt comes about 4 minutes later, packing major heat. My friend was not long after her. I went from home alone to an impromptu house party of concerned people. The police get there like 10 minutes later, and they didn't just take 30 minutes to arrive to the scene either, which is not normal, right? On the brighter side, my bird wasn't too alerted by this encounter and went back to eating not 5 minutes later, and my dogs were just as happy to see all the people as I was. My friend has been staying the nights with me since then. I'm honestly finding it hard to be home alone at this point, despite the fact that an arrest was actually made. I'm thankful that my neighbor had such good instincts and that my aunt and friend were so quick on their feet, because honestly, this could have been just so much worse. My great-grandfather homesteaded in Alaska before all the housing developments and heavy traffic came in. Used to be a really quiet area, very swampy, super cold in winter. You'd walk through the swamp and hit patches not quite frozen all the way through, even in the deepest part of winter. Now, obviously, that in and of itself isn't unusual. Running water doesn't always freeze. It's a geological active area too, there's reasons for that. However, my great-grandfather spent time in Ireland before settling in Alaska, and he liked to tell how when he was there, he rescued a pair of fairies and made a pact with them, in exchange for being able to see things nobody else could. He'd apparently take them with him and provide alcohol to their liking. When he settled in the homestead, he liked to tell this story, that he brought the fairies with him. And so long as they had a drop of alcohol and good company in the cold winter, there they would stay. Now, we did see something on occasion at the swamp, not just as kids too, but even as adults. They looked like fireflies or a ball of light, mostly in white, but you'd see one in red or blue now and again. Not like slightly red or slightly blue, like red M&M or blue M&M sort of color, but glowing type of red or blue. We also saw them inside the cabin a couple of times. Sometimes they would follow you or collect nearby while we were chopping firewood, but not always. The red one was almost always around when someone got hurt though. We were all fairly convinced that it made bad things happen. I'm not sure if people outside of our family saw them, but I do know everyone within my immediate family had at least a handful of direct experiences with them, and at least one negative experience with the red light, or fairy as my family's always called it. The cabin had a sort of lodge-style design, I suppose. The rooms were lofted and to either side of the living room, kind of like in hotels, where there's an open middle section, banisters surrounded it, with rooms on opposite sides. And while none of that really matters all that much, except that from upstairs, you could see either side of the wall dividing the kitchen and the sunroom, and on more than one occasion you would see these little balls of light hit the wall and just keep going out the other side. You would also hear whistling sometimes, kind of an echo of what my great-grandfather sounded like when he was drinking, and as he liked to say, chatting with the fairies in his putter room. It would happen when you were in the swamp as well and in the house, and when you were the only one on the property at all. The homestead burned down shortly after my great-grandfather passed away, maybe 7 years ago, and so far, nobody is in a hurry to rebuild there. I do wonder sometimes though if the lights are still out there or the whistling, but I'm really not in any rush to go and find out. Mainly because, I don't know, something tells me that they're not fairies. This happened last night, and I'm still pretty freaked out about it. We're up at my father-in-law's for Christmas. He lives in South Jersey, in a pretty remote area just north of Burn State Forest. It's quiet and always a little eerie, but felt especially weird with the overcast weather and unseasonable warmth of the last few days. We did Christmas dinner at my brother-in-law's and got back pretty late. Because of the radiator heat and outside temps, we slept with the window open that night. I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, and as I was drifting back to sleep, I heard a low wail, building in volume for a few seconds before stopping abruptly. I figured that it was just an odd-sounding bird and tried to go back to sleep. It happened twice more over the course of about 5 minutes, though. I was basically able to put it out of my head and start drifting back to sleep when I heard a loud, shrill blast like a two-high elephant's trumpet. At this point, I shot up, heart racing. I knew that I had to close the window, and it took a bit to build up to it. When I dragged myself out of bed, I peeked through the shutters before I reached to shut the pane, and whatever it was had tripped a motion sensor light at the back of the property and was now half illuminated, standing maybe 100 feet from the back door, right at the tree line. It was cloaked, with its head partially shrouded. The bottom of its face looked flat and round like the back of a dinner plate, with another smaller, half-uncovered black circle at its center. It was humanoid, and that was enough for me. I immediately slammed the window shut, and it didn't move, just stood there with its face tilted towards the window. I shut the blinds and crept back into bed, and basically hid until the sun came up. I didn't hear any more sounds after that. I dared another look out of the window after dawn, and the figure was now gone. I managed to drift back to sleep for a few hours after that too. So, has anyone seen anything like this or know what it might be? I'm frantically Googling, but nothing is really coming up. I would have been about, maybe 3 to 5 years old at this time. I wasn't in school yet, but I wasn't using diapers anymore, just underwear. We lived in Arizona, though, in the early 80s. I had my own room, and my parents were in the room next to mine. It would get hot as well, so I just slept in my underwear on my stomach. My family was friends with our neighbor, who lived in the apartment next to ours. I remember he was a pretty cool guy who was always super nice to me and gave me candy. And one time he was working in the attic, and the wood was so bad up there that he actually fell through into our apartment once. It was a complete mess, and now, my dad, like other people in the 80s, was into drinking and doing drugs. He was always good to me, but he did like to go out with the fellas and party from time to time. Our neighbor also liked to party, so they would usually go out together and come back late at night. And it seems my dad could handle partying a little and not going overboard, but as for our family friend, he was very much not like that. Now, I don't know the exact story, but there were 2 rumors how he died. One was that he ended his own life from his drug addiction, and the other that he was actually murdered for a drug deal and made to look like he killed himself. Either way, he was found dead near a native reservation hanging by a palm tree. Being so young, I really didn't understand what death was at the time. My family and I went to the funeral viewing, though, and the burial. The next week, we visited his grave, and I was really confused as to why my candy buddy wasn't around anymore, so I asked my parents where he was. They told me that he was deep in the ground near his headstone. Being a child, I started hopping up and down on his grave, yelling his name, and asking if he was down there. And well, my mum didn't like that very much, and told me to stop, so I did. Now that night was just normal, and then it was time for bed. So I'm in my underwear falling asleep on my stomach, and it felt like I was right about to fall asleep when I heard our family friend whisper my name. I jolted up and looked around, but there was nothing there. There were no other voices, and I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. I did run into my parents' room, though, and I told them what happened, and after that, I slept with them that night. I never again did sleep on my stomach in my underwear after that. I always have to have a sheet or blanket on now. I never heard the voice again, but I do distinctly remember hearing his voice that night. I knew that it was his voice, and I knew that I heard something. Also, I never did jump on anyone's grave ever again after that. It was February 22nd. I was taking a bus home like I usually do, Hung out with my friends after school, so it was like 7 p.m. and dark. I was the only one on the bus until this guy, if I had to guess, in his 30s or 40s, gets on at one of the stops. He looked kind of sketchy, so I didn't look at him much, but he kind of looked like Eminem, I suppose. Anyway, the bus driver stops and is taking a break for something. I don't know, but he says that he can't have us stay on the bus while he's gone. So the sketchy guy gets up, grumbling and swearing to himself about how it's so cold and whatnot. We all get off though, and the sketchy guy and the bus driver go to the Circle K that we're stopped by, and I don't want to stand in the dark by myself, so I follow them. Thing is though, by the time that I go over there, sketchy guy is coming back out already. I'm trying to avoid all eye contact and not get in the way of this guy, but he stops me and starts saying things like, "Look at you, you're not even dressed for the weather. How old are you? You shouldn't be out like this." He then offers me his jacket, which I politely decline, and then starts offering to buy me hot chocolate. I'm getting pretty uncomfortable at this point, so I just say yes and go in with him. He buys the hot chocolate for me and I say thanks, and he just starts ranting about how the bus driver is a terrible person for kicking us off, etc., etc. I'm kind of tuning him out until he says, "If that bus driver leaves without us, I'll chase him to the next stop and put a bullet between his eyes." I was like, wow, okay, what am I even supposed to say to that? He starts making more death threats to the bus driver, till he drops the bombshell and says, "I've done it before, you know. I've killed a man before." I'm just walking there, trying to think of a response to a literal murder confession. The only thing that I could think of at the time was, did he deserve it? And he says, "Oh yeah, he did." And then just doesn't talk to me for the rest of the bus ride. I have no idea what I'm supposed to do with that information. I looked for mugshots from murderers in my area, and there was nothing that looked like him. So, should I tip the police or something? Let them know that, hey, there's a murderer running loose and presumably hasn't been caught yet. I'm pretty freaked out by all of this. I'm not sure if he was trying to scare me or what, but all advice would be really helpful. I'll preface this by saying that we were 12, 13 at the time, and my friend and I often snuck out of either of our houses during sleepovers for late night walks. This was the basis of this terrifying encounter as well, and it stopped us from ever sneaking out after dark again. My friend lived opposite a huge forest, so her house was the preferred choice to sneak out for us to roam around at night, because the forest was more scary and thrilling, I guess. And we always took flashlights, food, and blankets so we could camp out for a couple of hours before going back home again. Well, on this fateful night, we inadvertently fell asleep instead of staying awake, so when my friend suddenly jolted me from sleep, it was past 3 a.m., which was a lot later than we usually snuck out. We grabbed our essentials and creeped out of the back door into the cold and dark night. Frost crunched underfoot as we crossed the deserted road, and as we reached the entrance to the forest, we noticed how pitch black it was and completely silent too. Unnervingly so, in fact. We turned on our torches, stepped into the uneven path into the forest, the light illuminating the trees swaying in the icy wind. We stepped on fallen, sodden leaves and bark as we made an unsteady but familiar way into our favorite part of the forest, our cold breath the only noise to invade the deafening silence. We reached the small hut that we constructed one afternoon, made entirely of sticks, purely for the purpose of having some shelter for our campouts. There were times that vandals or other kids damaged our hut, but for the most part it stayed intact. But on this occasion, it was completely destroyed, almost like a harbinger of what was to come. We were just deciding to just call it a night and come back later on that day to repair the hut when we heard it. The loud shrieking giggle that made the hair on the back of my neck instantly stand up. My friend and I jumped in shock and looked at each other like, what the heck was that? We were completely freaked out. The eerie and unnatural giggle rang out again, contradicting the silence and making my body break out in goosebumps. "Someone's here," my friend whispered to me, looking utterly terrified. "We have to go now." Her voice of rationale made it even more scary and unnerving to me that someone was in the forest with us at 3 o'clock in the morning. We just looked at each other in assent and took off running in unison, our footsteps navigating the path as naturally as we could from muscle memory, our uneven gasps of air punctuating the giggling that seemed to be following us now, getting closer and closer. Our torch's light went up and down with our fast movements, illuminating random patches of trees and bushes as we finally saw a small sliver of light as we came to the forest entrance. Running out of the forest, we didn't stop until we reached the back door of my friend's house and almost collapsed in a breathless heap of relief to be safe. Then, my friend's eyes went wide and she nudged me, pointing a shaky finger to across the road. A haggard woman of indeterminate age was standing at the forest entrance giggling that awful, horrifying giggle and was now waving over at us. We screamed and ran inside and looked out of my friend's bedroom window through the smallest gap in the curtain and could still see the woman standing there for some time. Worse yet, she was staring right at us, almost as if, I don't know, she knew that we were there somehow. We could tell that she was still giggling that hideous, appalling laugh, and then she just turned, very slowly, and walked back into the forest again. Needless to say, we never went back to that forest, nor went out after dark ever again. So I'm going to start by saying that I'm basically a skeptic when it comes to the paranormal. Although I do love hearing stories and listening to others' points of views when it comes to that kind of stuff. This is why I'm having such a hard time, I think, of understanding what happened to me last September. You see, my dad, grandma, grandpa and I were attending my cousin's wedding in a small rural town just outside of South Haven, MI, late last summer. We rented a small house in town which was located in a very wooded area just off of a small lake. Something felt extremely off as soon as I got out of the car at our rental property, though. That's the best way that I can describe it, too. Something felt off, and I was just immediately uneasy. But being the skeptic that I am, I shrugged it off and just chalked it up to being tired and anxious, I guess. The night that we arrived, my dad and I were having a smoke outside and noticed how weird everything sounded. It was about 11 p.m. and there was nobody else around. But the trees were crackling incredibly loudly and we were hearing strange animal noises too. But nothing too out of the ordinary, I guess. Just the type of animal noises that you would hear in rural Michigan, I guess. But they just sounded particularly strange to us for some reason. In any case, we said our goodnights and we went to bed. The next morning, my dad told me that he went outside for a smoke at about 2ish that morning and heard what sounded to him like somebody close by banging on metal siding or something. He said that it sounded like it was just next door, but didn't hear anything leading up to or preceding the loud banging, like footsteps or anything like that. We shrugged it off in the end and we just laughed it off. It was the second night, though. It was when I heard the thing that I still cannot stop thinking about 6 months later. It was about 11 p.m. to midnight, and I was having my last smoke of the night. My grandparents were already asleep, and my dad had gotten into bed, but still awake just watching TV. I was sitting on the stairs outside of my back to the house, looking straight out into the backyard, when I heard someone shout my name in a very abrupt manner, loud and quickly. It sounded like they were shouting toward me from the front of the house, like they were standing on the front porch shouting for me, knowing that I was at the back of the house. And it sounded just like my dad, but it couldn't have been him because I didn't hear the front door open or close or anything. Being a skeptic, I reminded myself to stay calm and I quickly walked back into the house. My dad was sound asleep, so there was no way that by the time that I got to him, he could have gotten back into bed. I woke him up in any case and I asked him if he was outside screaming my name. He looked confused and said, "Of course not." I started to get really freaked out at that point. I tried to go to bed, but just couldn't get the scream out of my head. I was up all night trying to figure out what had happened. I was honestly contemplating leaving, getting a hotel room somewhere close by and returning in the morning. Miraculously, I must have fallen asleep sometime around 3 in the morning. We woke up in the next morning and I was so ready to get the heck out of that town. As soon as we left, the uneasy feeling that I had the entire weekend disappeared. When I returned to work the next day, I told my coworker the weird experience that I had. Her face immediately dropped. She proceeded to inform me that this is apparently quite common in the Appalachian area regarding cryptids and other types of creatures. Apparently, they try to get your attention by mimicking someone close to you, and when you look at them, they kidnap you or something along those lines. But I was in Michigan. I tried to look up information about the town that I was in, but I couldn't find anything remotely interesting or related. So I'm wondering, has anyone else had a similar experience to mine? And if you have, what was it? It was April of 2008. I was 20 and living in Denver for a year-long work contract with a non-profit in Boulder. My girlfriend, now wife, and my best friend Tim drove to Colorado from our home state to visit me for my 21st birthday. The non-profit that I was working for housed their workers in dorm rooms, and drinking was not allowed on site, nor were visitors allowed to stay overnight. So I booked a hotel in downtown Denver for the weekend where we could drink in honor of my 21st. The hotel was big, very nice, and in a safe central area of the city. So nice, in fact, that it was the same hotel that most of the politicians would later stay at during the DNC convention of '08 that took place in Denver later that summer. My wife and Tim, they arrived Saturday morning and we all met up at the hotel. The day was fantastic. We drank across the city most of the day. By about 1 a.m. we got back to the hotel. The room was typical with 2 queen beds. Bed number 1 was close to a big window looking out across the city. Bed number 2 was pushed against the wall with a door that opened to the bathroom. You couldn't see the door or entryway to our room unless you were at the foot of the bed of number 1. But we drank more and chatted in the room until about 4 a.m. My wife was laying at the head of the bed, number 2, flipping through the TV. Tim and I were seated at the foot of bed number 1, staring out of the window as we talked. As we talked, I heard some movement and sound of the door opening. Without looking away from the window, I assumed that it was my wife getting up to use the bathroom. A few minutes passed by and I thought that I heard movement again, so I finally turned around to look. I saw my wife still lounging in bed number 2 as she had been. "Did you get up a few minutes ago and use the bathroom?" I asked her. No," she replied. "I thought that I heard the door," I said back to her, with her just looking confused back at me. "Yeah, I thought that I heard that too," Tim said, breaking his own gaze from the window. It was then that I started to run cold and sobered up pretty quickly. Very softly, I heard Tim say, "Hey, I think that there's someone in our room." I lurched forward from the foot of the bed to look into the pitch-black entryway. I could barely make it out, and I wanted to believe that I was just seeing things, but there was a man, dressed in all black, with a black baseball cap, pressed into the 90-degree corner of the entryway, where the room door and the wall met. Absolute silence fell on the room, and it felt like hours passed by as I started to panic, and in my mind I said, no way have I ever had anything like this in my entire life happen. We all knew. We knew that we weren't alone, and hadn't been for a while as well, and he knew that we had spotted him. Eventually, Tim got the courage to meekly speak in the direction of the corner in the entryway and said, "Hey man, is there something that we can help you out with?" Another period of silence that felt like an eternity went by. He slumped off the edge of the wall a little into the light and made eye contact with Tim and I. We all just stared at each other. Then eventually he spoke up and said, "Is this room 1709? "No man, it's not," Tim said, stroking his beard nervously. He stared at us for a while longer, raising his eyebrows and shaking his head. And then he turned around and left. We then erupted into a million curse words and paced around the room. I called the front desk. They told me that he was drunk and that they found him in the stairwell, but directed him back to the right room. Minutes later, Tim called the front desk and they told him that he was not a guest. He was apprehended in the stairwell, apparently, and taken into police custody. And a while later, they told my wife that he had disappeared, and they had no idea who he was or what he was doing. They told her that there wasn't even a room 1709 in the hotel. We got 3 different stories from the front desk is what I'm getting at, and we still have no idea what it was all about, or how he managed to get a keycard to our room. We were sure the door was closed, in fact. It was easily the most terrifying moment of my life, and always use the latch in the hotel rooms is my advice. We got the stay refunded and about $200 in credit for food from the hotel. We would have sued, but we were young and stupid, and to be honest, we just wanted to get out of there and forget about it. So I was kicked out of my mother's house at 18 and went to live with my uncle and father in Selma, AL. It was an old house that belonged to my grandmother before she passed. My folks used to tell me stories when I was younger about the house, saying that it was haunted or something and was once a slave house. Selma has a history of slavery and even was once called Slave City, so I believe the stories. But there was even a rumor, though, that a witch lived in the house before my grandmother. It's also rumored that my grandmother's brother even dated a woman who was said to be a witch, and apparently she put candles around the doorsteps with a chicken with its head cut off in the middle or something. I've had family members tell me about their stories of seeing and hearing paranormal activity around the house, but at this point, I had never witnessed anything myself, so I thought that they were all just superstitious and paranoid. Anyway, after a while, I moved into my father's old room, and he warned me that one day I'll start hearing voices. I had a dog at the time, and he even warned me that one day my dog would die. His exact words were a bit more cryptic than that, though, but I got the drift. He said they'll either kill you or the dog. I laughed, thinking that he was just joking, to be honest. He told me that my aunt was secretly a witch and that I couldn't trust my uncle. He also told me that if something starts calling for you to come outside the room at strange times, it's not real. I laughed at him even more then because I remembered other family members saying that he was crazy and talked to himself sometimes. Despite his claims, everything seemed okay for a while though. One day I was preparing to leave Selma for a job interview in Montgomery. My aunt saw me dressed up and asked where I was headed. I told my aunt, who was living there at the time too, that I was going to take a nap and I was heading to Montgomery afterward for a job, an interview. Hours later, I walked out of the house to find that my front tire was slashed. All of a sudden, my aunt appeared out of nowhere and asked what happened. And this was a bit strange to me. She was acting unusual, but I didn't question it. Luckily, I had a spare in the back of my Jeep. I fed my dog and left for Montgomery, and it was dark when I came back to Selma hours later. My uncle, though, said that my dog was dead, and he didn't know what happened to it, and that they had already buried him too. I felt some type of way about my dog mysteriously dying, so I asked my aunt's kids who were always outside playing what happened, and one of the kids told me that they beat the dog and kicked it until it stopped moving. Now, I have never heard this child talk like this, and he was really serious about it. Well, at least he seemed to be. Didn't blink or laugh while saying it. At this point, I knew something was wrong with my folks, and my father randomly came over to the house the next day. Before I could say anything about the dog, he said, "I told you that they were going to kill it." He also said that he saw my uncle talking to some Mexicans who were known for doing voodoo when he passed by late last night. Again, though, I just laughed it off because my father was always a joker. But deep inside, I was starting to get very worried, I have to admit. In any case, the next day, as soon as I woke up, I had this weird, unrealistic feeling. Then I heard my father call my name from outside the house. He called me by my nickname that he used to call me as a kid when he first lived in my grandmother's house. I was about to go out too when I remembered what he said. If something starts calling for you to come outside the room at strange times, it's not real. I paused for a few seconds, then swung the door open, but as he said, nobody was there. It was very early in the morning. My father was more than likely at work. And 2 days later, I woke up at 3 in the morning, walked outside of the house because I felt weird. As I walked around the outside of the house, I heard sounds like birds swooping over my head. When I looked up, I saw nothing but black shadows flying everywhere. I looked to the sky and the moon was so close to the earth that it might as well have been a giant eyeball staring right at me. A few days after that, the people from the job interview called back and said that I got the job. I was supposed to start next week. Later that night, though, I felt a presence in the room with me as I tried to sleep. It felt negative, so I put my headphones in and played some positive music. But even with the music playing, the presence felt like it was getting stronger and stronger. Somehow, too, my left earbud fell out of my ear, and it was then that I heard a dog or a wolf or something like that growling in the room. I could even feel the vibration of the growling. I instantly got up and left the house, and I didn't come back until the morning that night. Later in the week, I was preparing to leave the house so that I could live with my family in Montgomery for the job. I had gathered all of my things and was ready to go. I sat back on the bed to get a short rest before I hit the road, when all of a sudden, it sounded like something was running up to the side of the bed, and something grabbed my hair and yanked it. The force literally almost pulled me off the side of the bed. It was then that I left in that moment, and after that, I swore to myself that I would never be back, and I have never gone back since. December 3rd, 2022. It was around 10 p.m. My daughter was asleep on the sofa. I took her up to bed. She was sleepwalking again, and she said, "Stop it, Dad." I said, "I haven't done anything, Kelly." I laughed, and she had stopped in her tracks, and then had this odd sort of bent forward posture, with her arms stretched down to her sides, with her fingers spread out, and said, "I'm not Kelly," but in a sort of old woman's voice, with a deliberate pause before she said her name. "Of course you're Kelly, silly," I replied, and laughed. She then carried on walking half asleep to her bedroom. She got into her bed and closed her eyes. I kissed her on her head and I said, "Love you, Kelly." She started to fidget in her bed, and with her eyes still closed, announced, "I said, I'm not Kelly." The same old woman's voice and a pause before her name, and also now a bit of irritation in her voice. Then I realized this wasn't my daughter mimicking someone. This may be somebody else. I got goosebumps up and down my arms and said, with a little stutter in my voice, "If you're not Kelly, then who are you?" My daughter then opened her eyes, lifted her head, and adjusted herself to be eye to eye with me, and started to stare intensely into mine with these matte black eyes with no color, then put herself back on her pillow, shut her eyes, and just instantly went back to sleep. I woke her up, and it was like I'd awoken her from a deep slumber. I said, "Kelly, are you okay?" She says, "Yeah, Dad. Why did you wake me?" I said, "Oh, nothing, just checking that you're okay," and then asked her to pray with me, which she did with no issues, maybe a little bit of confusion. Then I kissed her on the head, said that I loved her, and I left her to go back to sleep. The next day, I had to drop a parcel to my neighbors next door. The brother and the sister opened the door. I gave them their parcel. Then I asked how they were because their mother had died in the summer. And I said, "Do you feel like your mum is about it all?" the daughter replied, "Oh yeah, they feel her presence a lot, and that they also had seen a ghost out on the fields in front of our house of a young girl, 6 years old, who had died on a playing area that used to be there." She then told me that she and her mother used to regularly use a Ouija board to contact the little girl, and had done this many times, speaking to her, and the little girl had replied saying that she is protecting the area so other children don't get killed there. And also a friend of the family who had died and was still visiting them in spirit form, apparently, dressed in a hood, and was seen moving through their rooms at night to check on them. I replied that I don't really mess with that stuff, and I just said my goodbyes to them. But I left with a really sick feeling in my stomach. 2 days later, I was going to bed for an early shift at work. I went to bed at 11 p.m. and went straight to sleep. And suddenly I awoke, but I had my eyes shut, and in my head I heard myself say, "There's somebody in the room." I opened my eyes, and in the dark, I could see a man with white hair and black glasses, working on a device pressing into it, where my wife's side of the bed is. I jumped back, shocked, and I started to get out of bed. I turned my head away just for a brief moment, and when I looked back, he was gone. It was a real person, though, totally solid and real to look at. I wasn't scared at that time. I guess I was just completely bewildered. I laid back down after getting a drink of water and went back to sleep somehow, and then again it happens. I'm suddenly awake with my eyes closed, and once again my mind is telling me that somebody is in the room. I open my eyes. This time, it's more sinister though. To my right, at the side of the bed where my wife sleeps, there's a creature with matte black eyes staring at me. In fact, the eyes reminded me of how my daughters looked a few days before. Whatever it was around 4.5 feet tall and seemed like a mixture of maybe a gargoyle and a gremlin with no wings, and long pointed ears that pointed straight up, nostrils like a gorilla's. Its skin was dark green and leathery with light orangey sort of brown tips going down its arms. It was looking straight at me with a mouth that seemed to be frothing on one side, and it looked very old, exhausted almost, very hungry perhaps, and was slowly panting while looking in my direction. I slowly got out of bed, not taking my eyes off of it for a second, and slowly walked around the bed towards it, and noticed that it had very long arms, with what looked like 5 clawed sort of fingers on each hand. The way that it was standing reminded me of the bent forward posture that my daughter had had earlier in the week, with the arms hanging down to its sides. I also noticed when I was moving from the bed, its gaze did not follow me. It seemed to be just looking to where I had been sleeping, and as I got a little closer, maybe 5 feet away, it then just disappeared from the room. Like it just was here in reality, and then all of a sudden it was gone. Not like it faded, but more like it just blinked out of reality. Well, obviously I was scared now, and after that I didn't get any more sleep. The next 2 weeks were fine, but from late December 2022 into now February of 2023, I have started to have real trouble sleeping. I feel like I'm constantly being watched, but also I feel an icy cold wind blows on my neck, around my spine and knees sometimes. My wife and the rest of my family are just fine. Me, I get really cold in areas of my body around my neck and knees and face, especially between my eyes and nose. If I'm lucky, I'll have like 1 to 2 days of good sleep and then a couple of days of bad sleep, maybe 2 hours sleep each day. I've seen a doctor and I've had a urine and blood test, and they've all come back fine. I've been given sleeping tablets and I have been taking calming tablets. They do help, but it's still happening, and I'm getting cold and sometimes feeling like, I don't know, something's here, watching. I also saw a vicar and had myself blessed, and also a crucifix and a Holy Bible blessed as well. And when I went around the house saying the Lord's Prayer and then telling it to leave by the power of God and Jesus, that seemed to help for 1 day. The house got very positive and light, and I slept really well. But the next day I had terrible sleep again, and it was almost like back to square one. I really don't know what to do. It's really disturbing me for obvious reasons, but to other people it probably just sounds like a bad horror film. I know that. I don't know if I'm going crazy. I don't know if I'm actually seeing something. I don't know why my daughter said what she said during her sleepwalking, but it feels real to me, and there have been other small things starting to happen, which even my other family members have noticed too, which makes me believe that I'm not going crazy. Something is actually happening. I was about 8 or 9 and lived in a small town in Alabama where everyone knows everyone. We lived in a subdivision of duplexes. The front of the neighborhood had a small rent office with the tenants' mailboxes outside on the wall. My favorite task was going to get the mail. This particular day, my sister, 5 or 6 at the time, asked to go with me. Our duplex was right behind the office, up at the top of the grassy hill. The backside of our home faced the office, so my sister and I would get to the mailbox, and as I'm removing the mail, a white middle-aged couple, irrelevant, I'll explain, pulled up in front of the building. This being Alabama in the 80s, our neighborhood was all black. The white people lived on the other side of the railroad tracks. I knew a lot of them as most families were here for generations, but I'd never seen this couple. The woman on the passenger side rolled down her window and said, "Excuse me, can we ask you all a question? We need directions." And I knew about stranger danger, so just planned to ignore them. My sister was starting to walk to the car window, though, as my back was partially turned, locking the mailbox. I ran and grabbed her hand and said run to the house. She tried to ask why as the woman continued calling us to the car. I raised my voice and said, "Get up the hill now." She started running up the hill. I turned to follow when the driver, a male, opened his door and in an angry voice said, "Get back here now." At this point, my sister was up the hill. I started running up the hill, and when I got to the top, I saw that the driver was standing a few feet from the bottom of the hill. I started to laugh and said, "Ha ha, I beat you. You're too slow." I even stuck my tongue out. He turned and walked back to his car. My mother was not home, don't remember where she was at, but I went into the house and stupidly never mentioned this incident until I was much older. I was around 15 or 16 when I remembered and understood the actual danger that I had been in that day. My mother was shaking when I finally told her.